Chapter 478. Blackrock Mountain, as described in Iradia's map, was originally a barren desert in the north. However, with the war between the Abyssal Demons and the Blackwing clan, the land was completely changed. The demi-plane collapsed, and the Flame Demon King Asliers landed in the Prime Material Plane. A roaring volcano rose from the ground, and the Blackrock Mountain was formed between the lair and the Dragon Nest in the north and the Mostel Canyon in the south. As soon as he arrived at the edge of the mountain, Caesar saw a few demons baring their fangs at the Wyvern Guards. Even after such a long time, these fellows still could not change their nature. Even if the Empire and Blackrock Mountain maintained a nominal alliance, the desire for blood and destruction still dominated these demons, causing them to repeatedly attack the Blackwing clan. However, Caesar's entry was smooth. The demons still had the most basic intelligence and beast-like instincts, not daring to bare their fangs in front of a life form 100 times stronger than themselves. There were also many spying eyes, but they all retreated as soon as they made contact, afraid of attracting the attention of this strange black dragon. The Flamestone Hall, where Caesar met the Flame Demon King last time. Accompanied by the sound of the earth's crust and flames rising, Asliers twisted his body and appeared behind him. "I'm so sorry, evil dragon. I didn't even know you were here." Asliers. Caesar turned to look at him. "Long time no see." The Flame Demon Lord's body was much smaller than before. He floated in the air and circled around the black dragon. "Let me see what use the Godfire has for you." Nothing. Also, there seems to be something wrong with your condition." Caesar did not reminisce about the old days and went straight to the point. "I need the Kiln Fire Core, the heart of a Baylor. The Prime Material Plane calls it the Kiln Fire Core." Asliers said, "Evil dragon, speaking of this, I still have a debt to settle with you. You built a town near my territory and encouraged those smelly adventurers to steal my things. My soldiers suffered a great blow because of this. Did you know that last time, a few ignorant humans actually rushed in front of me and forced me to take action personally? How humiliating. You should thank me for this." Caesar said matter-of-factly, "If it weren't for my help, your demons would only be able to kill each other and devour each other every day and night. Now that there's an endless stream of adventurers breaking in, you have a chance to vent your anger and targets to attack. Besides, aren't these human souls the food that you desire the most? I can't outtalk you." Asliers' voice was a little louder, but he soon laughed again. "But because of this, I didn't destroy that ridiculous town. All right, tell me, what do you want the Baylor's heart for? Do you have to ask?" Caesar glanced at the Flame Demon King and said frankly, "I'm going to ask the dwarves to make me a set of armor using the Molten Core. Are you interested?" "Pitiful physical life form, you don't understand." Asliers mocked. "As an elemental body, why would I need such a thing? Let me see." He circled around Caesar. "With your size and posture, the demand for armor must not be low. How much do you want?" "All of it." "Huh? How much do you have?" "I want all of it." Asliers paused for a moment before laughing. "Good. I finally understand why you want to establish a territory and a kingdom. It must feel good to squeeze the entire north to provide for yourself. This posture really makes me envious. Logically speaking, as an ally, I should give you the Molten Core for free if you need it, but your appetite is really big." Saying this, the Flame Demon King's tone suddenly changed. "Since that's the case, you definitely won't come empty-handed. Otherwise, this conversation will end here." "What do you want?" Caesar asked. "Demons want nothing more than power and destruction. And I'm no exception," Asliers said. "I want 10,000 young slaves, and you have to help me once. Agree to these 2 conditions, and all the Molten Core in my underground palace will be yours. Even if it's not enough, you can still get more. How about it? This return is rich enough, right? This is a friendship price." "It's indeed not bad." Caesar nodded. He could give the slaves of Vilost to Asliers, but I have to know what you want me to help you with. "The Abyss Gate," Asliers said eagerly. "The world of Iradia is no longer stable. This plane has more than one abyss crack. The power of 2 demigods is enough to tear it open and open the real abyss gate. You want to play Cataclysm? Caesar glanced at the excited Asliers. I refuse. In addition, if you insist on doing so, I will declare war on you. Don't jump to conclusions. After being rejected, Asliers was not angry at all. He continued, Don't anyone know where the abyss crack is? It's in the demi-plane of the unsetting sun empire, he said solemnly. It's very interesting, isn't it? I remember that when we were dealing with Monet, the unsetting sun empire did not participate in the battle. In fact, other than suppressing the rebellion on the surface, the real reason was that their main battle force was fighting the higher world in the demi-plane. In the end, these humans defeated my companions and sealed the crack. But it doesn't matter. I've already received messages from other lords and confirmed the exact location of the crack. You have to know that opening a passage from the prime material plane is 1,000,000 times easier than opening one from the higher world. I remember that the unsetting sun empire has always seen you as their mortal enemy. This is a good opportunity. Follow me and sneak in to open the abyss gate. After that, I will communicate with the higher world army in the north to wage war on the unsetting sun empire. In the end, we will be able to easily destroy the country created by the weak humans. How about it, evil dragon? Consider it? Aslier's voice was full of temptation. You're still the same, so talkative. Caesar said calmly, I repeat, I refuse. And if you insist on doing this, I will wage war with you. Why? Asliers asked. Isn't this what you want? The unsetting sun empire will wage war with me sooner or later. The black dragon stared at him. This war may affect many races in Iradia, but this is Iradia's business. There's no need for the demons to interfere. I don't understand. What does it matter? Aslier said, the important thing is the result. We will win. If I wage war with the unsetting sun empire, no matter who wins, there will always be innocent lives on the losing side who did not participate in the war. But when the demons descend on Iradia, you know the result better than I do, Caesar said. Isn't a little childish, evil dragon? Aslier sneered. As the evil dragon monarch, how many lives have you killed so far? I'm afraid it's too many to count. In the end, such ridiculous words actually came from your mouth. I doubt my own hearing. My hands are covered in blood, I don't deny it. Aslier's, we are all evil, but for me, killing lives is not fun, and the world is not meant to be destroyed. Those who are alive, who should be alive, should continue to live. Caesar said frankly, Aslier's, the reason why we can become allies is that, in my opinion, you are rational and not extremely warlike, but this does not change the fact that I am hostile to the demon race. For the sake of fighting side by side, I don't want to lie to you. If you really open the passage to let the Abyss army descend, the biggest possibility is that I will help the unsetting sun empire to kill the demons. Chapter 479. The flames around Aslier's became scorching hot. He stared at Caesar and did not speak for a long time. Fine. The flame demon lord took a few steps back. I don't care. The gates of the abyss will open sooner or later anyway, and the other sovereigns of the higher realms will eventually descend. I don't have the energy to fight a battle with you right now. Since you refuse, our conversation ends here. You won't get anything if you give up on the deal, Caesar said. Harming others without benefiting oneself is the motto of the evil faction. Aslier's laughed. You should know that very well. You can change your conditions. Black Dragon slowed down his voice. I don't allow other demons to enter Iradia, but you are different. We are allies. Aslier's, it must be hard to stay in the Black Rock Mountain all this time, right? What do you mean? Caesar's words attracted the Flame Demon King's attention again. I will help you obtain your freedom, Caesar said. What a joke. Do you think I am your prisoner? Black Dragon, you are too arrogant. Aslier seemed to be enraged and roared. As long as I want to, I can leave at any time and go to Iradia or even anywhere in the astral plane. I have never treated you as a prisoner. Caesar said, but can you really leave? You should know very well how many people in this world want to deal with you. In the prime material plane, it is not an exaggeration to say that demons are hated by everyone. The gods, whether good or evil, are your enemies. Apart from that, there are many powerful supernatural creatures. For example, a lich I met some time ago that is close to a god. For such creatures, the magic power and strength of an elemental demon lord is something they can only dream of. The reason why you chose to stay in the north is because you know that as long as we don't go to war, you will be safe here. At the very least, you don't have to worry about the venomous snakes and arrows in the shadows. Caesar stared at Asliers as if he had seen through his inner thoughts. Therefore, under the constraints of these considerations, you were forced to make some concessions and accept the fact that the Blackwing Empire had sent an army to seal off the Blackrock Mountain. You hid in the gloomy depths of the earth, hoping to reappear in the world when the Abyssal Legion descended upon Iradia. Caesar, you're infuriating me. Asliers shouted the Black Dragon's name, and the flames around the flame demon king rose up, and the cracks in the ground were gradually filled with blood like lava. If you and I were in each other's shoes, I would probably think the same. Caesar said lightly, so, you don't have to be angry because of this. What are you trying to say? Asliers roared. Our deal will continue. Caesar said, you give me the molten core, and I will let the army withdraw from this area. I will completely hand over the Blackrock Mountain and the entire Therengobi to you. Other than that, our alliance will go one step further. You can go to other places in Iradia on your own. If a god attacks you, I will help you, as long as you don't think about touching that crack of the abyss. It sounds like you've made a lot of concessions. Asliers snorted and said, but do you think you can fool me? Black Dragon, in this way, what's the difference between me and the Lord of the Dragon bloodline that you've conferred upon me? You expect me to stupidly agree to such conditions. As a great and noble being from the upper realm, how can I submit to you? I've emphasized many times that we are allies. Caesar shook his head. But if you tell me that a lord of the abyss of the evil faction cares about how other beings view you, I have nothing to say. Goodbye. After saying that, he turned around and walked out. Caesar's footsteps were neither fast nor slow. His pace was the same as when he entered the Blackrock Mountain. When he reached the exit of the passage, Aslier's low voice sounded behind him. Remember what you said, evil dragon. I agree. Okay. Emperor Black Dragon did not turn back. He passed through the passage, spread his huge wings, and left the Blackrock Mountain. Golden City, Villister. Ever since the Sea Folk's large-scale invasion, Villister had been engulfed in the flames of war. Prophet Crew rushed back to Golden City. He thought that the news he brought back from the coast would cause a commotion, but the order of the city did not change much. The people here were still busy with their own lives. The divine guards were busy managing the city. The slave masters were busy waving their whips. The prophets were busy observing the stars and divining, and the Coppertooth army continued to play the game of cat and mouse with the refugees on the streets. At first glance, it was still the brightest pearl of Villister. Of course, it was not that there were no changes. For example, there would be tribes fleeing for their lives every day. The number of beggars and slaves would increase day by day. Merchants would leave one after another to seek opportunities in the City of Silver. These minor changes did not attract attention, but it cast a layer of haze over the radiance of Golden City. The sun slowly sank into the mountains in the west. The sky turned from orange to dark red, and finally to dark purple. Crew stood on the Learning Tower and looked at the temple. He realized that there were bright lights there. When night fell, the second task of the prophets began. After returning to Golden City, the elders of the prophets requested that he could only step into the temple after 7 days. This was the rule, and Crew knew it. However, he felt uneasy today, so he planned to climb the Learning Tower and look at the stars in another way. As a prophet, Crew's abilities were far superior to the average person's. His eyesight was also far better than the average person's. He first used his eyes to find the brightest star of the Divine King. It was with Velost, and symbolized both good and bad fortune. Praise be to our Tarot, Crew whispered. The light of the Divine King's star put his uneasy heart at ease. He then looked at the other star zones. Although the constellations would change shape according to the seasons, and it might be difficult for a young prophet to grasp, to him, their light was as intimate as the cracks on his lips. After observing the entire star zone, it was almost midnight. Just as Crew felt that everything was fine and was about to leave, an insignificant light suddenly entered his eyes. In that instant, the prophet felt his blood freeze. Egon. He held his breath, bit his lower lip, and let a little blood seep out. He magnified his vision and focused all his attention in that direction. It was not an illusion. A dim star was hidden between the dark clouds and the bright moon. Its light was so weak that it seemed like it would be blown away by the wind at any time. However, what made it different from the surrounding stars was that it was dark blue. It appeared in the east, past the world star, and gradually approached the divine king's star. The bright stars on the way were swallowed and disappeared one by one, leaving only darkness in its wake. When the Death Star descends, the entire world will be doomed eternally. Crew's hands trembled. It has already passed the world star. This means that Egon is about to land on Villister. Chapter 480. The land outside of Kael'tan was already cultivated, and the burned crops were used as fertilizer. The female slaves were in charge of cutting the weeds, and a team of bulls was plowing the land beside the forest. 30 overmen were standing guard with axes. When Garen's troops arrived at the tribe, the people and animals had all fled back into the tribe. The gates of the tribe were tightly shut, and the archers of the sentry towers were filled with arrows. "Are you sure these are our own people? Is this how they welcome me?" Garen turned his head and asked from afar. "They didn't see you, Your Highness," Sir Kairos, who was leading the way, said. He shouted to the front, "Blow the horn." The troops blew the horn of Kael'tan. "This is the only castle in the entire east of Villister," Kairos introduced. Kylos explained, "In the past few years of war, Caladan has changed hands many times. The natives have looted it twice, and we have burned it once. Those stupid natives seem to know the importance of this place, and the fight for this castle is especially fierce. The soldiers stationed here are the most vigilant. Without hearing the horn, they won't open the gates easily." Garen looked at the black wing flag that was dyed in fire flying above the city. The city gate opened slowly. This gate was newly cast. The freshly cut oak planks were reinforced with rivets. The wooden steps and windows of the fortress had also been replaced. The city walls had also been repaired. Although the dark stones were silently telling of the fire of the past, time and rain would wash away the traces. "This place can't accept my troops." Garen glanced at it and ordered his followers, "Set up camp below the city walls, dig trenches, set up spikes, and build a fireproof barrier for the armored troops. Do it immediately. Unless there's a god encouraging them, I don't believe those natives will dare to provoke us," Blakesia said nonchalantly. "We are invincible. Because of this, they're more likely to take the risk." Before knowing the strength and range of activity of the surrounding natives, Garen didn't want to take any risks. "Dig trenches and build a barrier," he emphasized again. As a matter of fact, the army was not as invincible as Blakesia had described. As the attack went deeper, not only did the resistance of the natives not crumble, it even became stronger. Even the steel-like armored troops had suffered heavy losses due to ambushes. Garen realized that in this world, he and Blakesia were no different from beasts other than their intellect. The draconic magic and natural abilities that he was once proud of had all lost their effectiveness. Even flying was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. In that ambush, he felt a deep sense of helplessness. In the end, he had no choice but to sacrifice the battle lizard men to cover the retreat of the armored forces. Since then, Garen understood that the wars in this continent were completely different from those in Iradia. The Empire's individual combat power was completely suppressed. On the contrary, in the recent few wars, there were reports of the natives using extraordinary powers. Therefore, Garen became more and more careful and cautious, advancing step by step. After inspecting the troops once, Garen led the flying dragon into the city gate. "What a city of toys," said Blackshay. "You can't measure it by the Empire's standards. Compared to our home, all the other castles in the world are insignificant," Garen explained to her and sighed. "Come to think of it, Ordoronzo is really amazing. That guy's a monster from another world. Blakesia glanced at him. He's going to become a drake soon. The last time I saw him, I didn't even dare to look at him. Can you compare yourself to him? No. Garen chuckled. His ambition is greater than all of the colorful dragons. As for me, I just need to follow behind you. If only I had listened to you back then and not shamelessly followed Caesar around, everything would have been fine. Blakesia sighed. At that time, I thought you were stupid. Actually, I'm the stupid one. Who would have thought that he could reach this step? Look at his enemies now. They are the unfallen empire, the gods, and the dragon mother. Sometimes when I think about it, I tremble in fear. If he fails, we won't have a good ending. It's okay. Didn't you say that he's going to become a drake soon? He's not afraid of the gods. Garen comforted her. Within the city walls, crossbowmen patrolled on the battlements. They were all wearing horned helmets and the Empire's black and gray uniforms. After the two dragons entered the castle, the commander stationed in Karatonburg quickly came to greet them. Your Highness, please forgive us for not preparing well. To be honest, after the natives attacked the last time, our intelligence line with the rear was cut off. We didn't receive any news of your arrival. The commander was very thin. A black robe wrapped around his skinny thighs as he bowed to Garen. I won't be here for long, Garen said. What's your name? Commander. Automo. At your command, Your Highness. The rear has been cleaned up. We built 7 large strongholds along the way. Your communication can be restored now, Garen said. I need you to gather the information from the front. Organize it later and give it to my family. How many native tribes are there around? Quite a few, the commander said. The commander said, but these tribes are not united. Even if they know of our existence, they're still engaged in a cruel tribal war. A while ago, the scouts reported that they found a neighboring tribe. My adjutant and I immediately led 300 people to clean it up. But when we arrived, we found that other than the fence, the entire tribe no longer existed. There were bones and ashes everywhere. Someone else was one step ahead of us and killed everyone, including the women. Your Highness, you wouldn't believe what the natives did to the women. It made me want to vomit. These bastards shouldn't be living in this world. No, we need these natives. Commander Automo, you have to understand that the power of the Empire on the other side can't last long. Garen shook his head calmly. I'm very satisfied with the current situation of these tribes. We can use this opportunity to rewrite the rules and use the natives to rule the natives. That's what my brother did when he took over the countries in the north. He gave special privileges to the northerners who were loyal to him, expanded the territory of the Blackwing Lords, and rewrote the rules to make the people happy. In the end, people all sided with the Blackwing without any hesitation. To this day, the humans still see the Black Dragon Emperor as a different race, but they gladly accept his rule and do their best to serve him and maintain the operation of the Blackwing rules. The commander's face turned red because his father had indeed done that. He gathered his courage and argued. That's because His Majesty is just and great. His Majesty saved the Northerners from their miserable lives. The rules and laws he set are not empty words. They are countless times better than those lords who only know how to exploit and enslave the people. Naturally, the Northerners will support him. You seem to understand? Garen glanced at the insignificant human in front of him and smiled. If these natives can't support us, like how the Northerners support my brother, the Empire's rule will never be peaceful unless all the natives are killed. What I need to do now is to help Ordoronso spread the glory of the Blackwing to every corner of Villister. When everyone had left and he was the only one left, he scratched his head and said, but I really don't know how to do it. After all, the native tribes here are different from the northern kingdoms. I have to write a letter and ask Ordoronso. Chapter 481. At the end of the year, there was a rare snowfall in the north. Sparse snowflakes danced in the air, and the scene was rare and beautiful. However, the cold wind that blew from the Firmrock Fortress was as cold as the breath of the ice dragon in the legends. Even the bonfire in the room was trembling, and the flames flinched against the fireplace, making subtle, crackling sounds. In the wind and snow, Nero and the husky returned to the Blackwing Palace. When they met the Black Dragon, Caesar was replying to Garin, who was far away on the other side of the world. He was teaching his younger brother how to deal with the special situation of Violost and how to rule. At the same time, he asked Garin to try his best to collect dead iron, because to reforge the bio-augmentation armor, the current stock of the Blackwing Empire was not enough. After 15 minutes, Caesar put down his pen and handed the letter to the battle lizard man beside him. Only then did he raise his head and look at Nero and the husky who had been waiting silently. "You are very fast," Caesar praised. "More efficient than I thought." "Sorry, my master." Hearing Black Dragon's praise, the demon hound could not help but shrink its body and said with a little shame, "We did not get what you wanted. We have disappointed you." "Is that so?" Caesar asked in surprise. After the second radiation strengthening, Nero and the husky's combat power was not at the top of the material plane, but they were among the best in the legendary realm. They did not bring back the Eye of Gush, which surprised Black Dragon. "You were unable to break through the defense there? Was the information given to me by the Lich wrong?" "No." When Black Dragon asked this, Nero seemed to be even more ashamed. "We did not encounter any resistance from any creatures, but the end of the dimension where the magic ball pointed, there was a door. We were unable to crack that door." "Understood." Caesar took a sip of tea and shook his tail that was still there in his human form. He did not continue to ask. The demon hound and the flying dragon were warriors, not spellcasters with rich knowledge. When faced with a situation that required deconstructing spells, it was understandable that these two fellows were powerless. After tidying up the obsidian table, Black Dragon stood up and took back the magic ball he gave to Nero. "I'll go there myself." There was nothing mysterious about the place where the Eye of Gush was sealed. It was at the battlefield of the Battle of the Setting Sun, located below the Gula's Ridge in the Setting Sun Plains. With the guidance, Caesar easily passed through the maze-like dimensional passageway. However, as he approached the end, Caesar felt a powerful magical seal. This was the gate that Nero and the husky encountered. Caesar examined it. The spell structure was quite ancient, but it was very tight. At the same time, it had a stable source of magic power. There was almost no gap. If there was no one to help crack it from the other side, a legendary-level spellcaster would need an unimaginable amount of time and energy to deconstruct this gate. Unfortunately, all the locks and shackles built by Iradia in the form of energy, including this dimensional door that took countless efforts to build, were as fragile as paper in front of Caesar, who was standing in front of it. Dustless land. Without destroying the passageway, Black Dragon easily annihilated all the magic imprints in this place and stepped into the dimensional door. The last space was not big, and the furnishings were also very simple. On the dark ground, there was a bleeding altar. A huge eyeball was entrenched in the center of the altar, watching Caesar, who had stepped in from another dimension. Around it, countless bloodlines extended from the black hole and wrapped around the bleeding eyeball like chains. As soon as Caesar came in, the strong smell of blood and rotten acid made him frown. His body adapted to the gravity environment that was completely different from before and stood firmly on the ground. Although it had left the body of the original owner and was surrounded by countless curses, this eyeball still showed amazing power and oppression. Staring at it, Caesar could not help but fall into a moment of hesitation. It would not be difficult to take it away and remove the curse of the orcs, but it might bring about quite a lot of trouble in the future. When he returned to Eladia, there would be countless creatures who would come to him for this eyeball. The god of hunting, the god of war, Bahamut, Tiamat, and many other gods of various sizes, as well as all sorts of so-called righteous people, would not just sit back and watch Caesar obtain a god's eye. And these were just small things. More importantly, once he took away this eyeball, it was equal to starting a war with the unfallen empire that had cursed him. At the same time, he would offend the gods who had participated in the war between the orcs and humans. On the other hand, as the master god of the orcs, it was hard to say whether Gush would appreciate it. Forget it. I'm too lazy to think about it. Caesar took a breath and said to himself, "The antimatter foundation has been built. When I get another core, I will be a hate in the future, What is there to be afraid of? Well, he nodded, agreed with himself, and began to walk forward. The astral world could be roughly divided into 5 categories for all kinds of powerful non-gods from weak to strong. They were labeled with 5 different terms: ordinary creatures, legendary creatures, extraordinary creatures, hate, and ancient evil creatures. However, these classifications were not strict because the whole astral world had endless lives and complicated powers. If they were strictly and meticulously divided, they might be divided into hundreds of levels. Not only was the work huge, but it was also meaningless. Creatures at the level of hate and evil creatures generally had the ability to compete with or even hunt down true gods. In fact, there was no difference between the two in terms of strength. The only difference was the form of life. The original meaning of the word hate was a variety of divine abomination creatures. This kind of life was born with legendary power and had all kinds of powerful halo immunity. To a large extent, they were not affected by divine power and had strong growth attributes. Hate was generally a guy with a strong background. Their parents were definitely powerful, but they were deformed products, so they were born with hate and generally yearned for slaughter and destruction. However, evil creatures were different. Evil creatures were not necessarily evil. Those creatures that appeared out of nowhere, and even the gods were unable to identify their origins, were known as evil creatures. Some of them were life forms formed from the expansion of order or chaos. Some of them originated from the death of a plane and were born amidst the brilliant destruction. Some of them were balls that possessed their own consciousness. Some of them could even be ordinary grass that had evolved from. Because of the lack of knowledge, Caesar's statement was wrong. In the future, even if he grew up to be a life form that could fight with the gods in the gods' kingdom, he would be called evil creature instead of hate. Of course, this pronoun was not important. In fact, when Caesar had the fusion furnace, he could already enter the screening criteria of evil creature because of his various special abilities. It was just that he was the weaker kind. When his life level and physical strength were further strengthened, the term evil creature would undoubtedly be crowned on his head. Chapter 482. What would happen if a piece of low-temperature ice was thrown into boiling oil? Caesar now experienced it. With just one step, the eye of Gawushin erupted completely as if it had been stimulated. The black dragon and the scales on his body let out a low roar. His body suddenly stopped, and several white tiny wounds were torn open. Dark red blood gushed out uncontrollably. Ah! The screams that impacted the soul came one after another, as if countless sharp swords were entering and exiting every part of his body. But what was more terrifying than this was that the tyrannical will of the eye of Gawushi that had been wiped out by the sun god Petrov had revived. Perhaps this eyeball was far less powerful than the Black Dragon Emperor in terms of power, but it was crazier. Its icicle-like will exploded in the depths of Caesar's spiritual sea. There were war songs and roars everywhere, stirring up huge waves in the peaceful sea. Fighting and struggling, Caesar felt as if he had returned to the battlefield of the apocalypse. Every creature had become his enemy. Orcs, humans, and other races were all roaring and charging at him with bloodshot eyes. However, Caesar was ultimately a psionic black dragon. He had unique and precise control over his spirit. Soon, he regained his rationality and did not fall into a deeper nightmare. What a surprising little troublemaker. Caesar remembered the reminder from the Lich. He cracked his neck, and the dizziness and trance quickly left his mind. He looked at his body, and the small wounds from the inside out were quickly healing. As long as he could survive the sneak attack of the crazy will, these small wounds were nothing. The black dragon raised his head and looked at the huge eyeball again. Judging from the proportions of this thing, the real body of the main god of the orcs, Gush, was at least a few hundred meters long. The organ that was pulled out from the body of the god glowed with blood, and the chains around it became full and swollen. There were many shackles and runes around the eyeball, but they were all ignored by Caesar. The black dragon stepped forward again and grabbed the bleeding eyeball. The power source was cut off, and the earth that sealed the space collapsed. Thousands of red lightning bolts tore the space apart, and Caesar could only float in the air. Finally, it's here. The black dragon felt the vibration of the eyeball, and the crazy killing will in it was retracted. Its self-consciousness was completely restored, and it used its divine power to vibrate the surrounding space and said, "No matter who you are, I have to thank you properly. I have been imprisoned for 1,000 years. Have you heard of Monet?" Caesar muttered casually. "He was beaten to death not long ago. I heard that guy was pressed down for 7,000 years. You're considered lucky." The eyeball stopped talking. The black dragon could feel a buzzing flow coming from inside the eyeball. It seemed to be thinking about what Monet was. After a pause, it said in a low voice, "Who killed that thing?" A whirlpool appeared in the center of the sealed space, and the pitch-black ripples pulled everything it touched into the chaos at the bottom of the astral world. The collapsed space spun and was sucked into the whirlpool. Caesar casually tore through space and brought the eyeball back to the prime material plane. "Are you or Gawishi?" Caesar did not answer the eyeball's question. He wanted to clarify another thing first. After Gawishi's was erased by the sun god, the eye of Gawishi was sealed. In the long years that followed, this eyeball relied on its powerful divinity to give birth to self-consciousness, which is me. The eyeball broke free from its claws, and Caesar did not stop it. It looked at the environment of the prime material plane while talking to the black dragon. "Strictly speaking, I'm a part of Gawishi, a clone of Gawishi. But in reality, as long as we don't meet Gawishi, I am me, and Gawishi is Gawishi. From what you said, you don't seem to want to meet your master." The black dragon sat down and scratched his chin. "Yes, I carry a large part of his power. After meeting me, he will definitely erase my consciousness and take back the eyeball. The characteristics of my body determine that I can't resist and can only obey his will," the eyeball said. "So the moment I broke free from the control of the seal, I stopped my body from spontaneously sending messages to Gawishi. Even now, I have also blocked the connection between the surrounding area and the outside world. You must know that we have mentioned his name several times during this period." "Is that so?" Caesar smiled. This matter was rather interesting. However, he did not continue to probe further. Instead, he asked, "The humans have placed a curse on the entire orc race in this plane through you. That's why the orcs of Eladia have never been able to break through the upper limit of the legendary level. Perhaps you know the solution." "That's great." Unexpectedly, when Caesar mentioned this problem, the eyeball let out a sound of approval. "These sinners should be punished. If it weren't for these stupid scum who try to seize the power of the eyeball wouldn't have to fall into a deep sleep to protect itself. In the end, even if Gawishi was defeated, the eyeball could have escaped the pursuit of the humans. If that was the case, there wouldn't be you." Caesar poured cold water on it. "Yes, but if that was the case, I wouldn't have to suffer 1,700 years of suffering. Dragon, I think you may have never felt that kind of feeling. Now, the scum of this plane have met the end they deserve," the eyeball said with a sigh. Caesar's voice became cold. "I asked you the solution." The eyeball turned its back to the black dragon, and its tone did not change. "I won't tell you, because these sinners will continue to be responsible for their mistakes. You think I'm a savior?" Caesar walked forward, and the dimensional pressure spread out uncontrollably with his emotional fluctuations. "Idiot, I tried my best to find you and rescue you from the seal of the abyss of suffering. Now, use your newly born consciousness to think about it. Why am I doing this?" The eyeball's body that was floating up and down suddenly stopped, and it withdrew its gaze from the main material world. It slowly turned around and stared at Caesar, and said in a calm tone, word by word, "Black Dragon, I think you are hostile." "Not bad. You can hear that I'm hostile." Caesar looked into its eyes. "I don't want to repeat myself." The eye of Gawishi decided to take action to determine the status of both sides and get the right to speak. The eyeball suddenly opened to its limit, and a terrifying will shot out from the eyeball and focused on the black dragon. The latter's body suddenly stopped, and all the muscle movements, blood flow, energy, and thoughts in his body stopped, and he could no longer move. Terror gaze. Caesar slapped it away, raised his neck, and looked down at the eyeball. His back blocked the sun, forming a huge shadow. Two tubes of white gas came out of his huge nostrils as he looked down at the eye of God. You just asked me who killed Monet, and I'll tell you now. Even if Gawushi's real body appears in Iradia, he has to bow his head in front of me. I said it. There was no ray or ball. Caesar turned his neck, which was dozens of meters long, and then let Edict, Emperor, explode. The space behind the eyeball suddenly shattered like a mirror, and in the end, it all collapsed. The turbulent chaos flooded the entire area. The eyeball was sluggish for a long time, and when the space behind it began to form a cocoon and recover, it said with difficulty, "The curse has been lifted." That's more like it. Caesar nodded in satisfaction and turned around. Well, your name will be Corgi from now on. Come with me. Chapter 483. Tanlutu opened his eyes. Although no one reminded him, he knew that it was dawn. As an orc, if he had to get up with the sun in the past, he would definitely yawn. But at this time, Tanlutu was not sleepy at all. He was full of energy. After wiping his face with water, he put on the academy's trainee uniform. The uniform was gray and black, and the embroidered hammer and axe were lifelike. The trainee uniform of an orc was a combination of daily clothes and combat uniform. Whether it was in class or in a competition, it would not be a problem to wear it. As the young orc walked out of his house, he could not help but look up. The sunlight shone on the wide and flat gravel road. The gravel road stretched as far as the eye could see. Tanlutu basked in the peaceful and comfortable sunlight. He could not help but think of his parents who were fighting on the other side of the sea. He knew clearly that this peace and harmony was bought with the blood of countless black wings. He paused and made up his mind to write a letter to his father, Orcash. This was Victory, the city of orcs only dozens of miles away from King City. Tanlutu was in a newly built residential group, which was adjacent to the Academy's trainee residence. The flames of war never cease. Tanlu, a female voice, sounded beside him. Eternal will. Good morning, Nahi. Tanlutu turned his head and smiled. He was also a trainee, but she was a few years older than him. She should be an adult soon. She was a mixed blood, the child of a human and an orc. She had a good temper and was very beautiful. She was faster and more agile than an orc, so she was very popular. It was said that in the early days, this kind of mixed blood orc was very excluded. At that time, both humans and orcs despised this kind of bloodline, but the Empire did not forbid the union between humans and orcs and did not treat mixed blood orcs differently. Later, after more than 10 years of development, the number of mixed blood orcs slowly increased, and their situation became much better. How long did you sleep today? He asked. 8 or 9 hours. What's wrong? He nodded. Let's talk while we walk. They walked side by side to the academy. On the way, Nahi and Tanlutu shared some pine nut shortbread and light sweet wine for breakfast. This was the cooking of Nahi's mother. Orcs would not make such light food. Their food was usually bacon or pancakes. Usually, I wake up before the sun rises every day. This is my family's habit, but today I missed the time. Nahi said, the classes in the academy are too tiring. Every day is very tiring. Tanlutu wolfed down the biscuits and sweet wine, but ended up choking and pounding his chest. That's not the reason. Nahi rolled her eyes. It's us who are changing. I was all right, but mostly my father, who became more and more sleepy. He was still asleep when I left, and my mother's nagging increased every day. Tanchalu, don't you feel it? In your appetite? Nahi didn't eat much and gave the rest to Tanlutu. However, it still didn't seem to be enough because he would feel very hungry before noon. Really? Tanlutu scratched his head. I don't think I feel anything. You should have fallen asleep when you got home yesterday. You can try. When you get home, take note of the time, Nahi said seriously. According to my estimation. Teacher save Kent. In front of me, the beastmen were carrying heavy weapons on their backs as they walked towards me with light steps. Skaner was the daughter of the great chieftain. She had just reached adulthood, but she was already an elite warrior who had been certified by the Academy. Her amazing hard work and super high talent made her a celebrity in the Academy. She had also changed her Academy uniform into pure black, symbolizing her identity as an instructor's assistant. Although she was only a few years older, Tenludu and Nahi already had to call her teacher. The flames of war never cease. The will lasts forever. The two trainees replied in unison. Are you going to class? Save Kent asked softly. Yes. In the morning, it's animal taming foundation and first aid. In the afternoon, there's a combat practice. Let's walk together, teacher Save Kent. You can just call me Senior. As they approached the Victor Empire Academy, the golden oak trees on both sides gradually came into view. In the square, close to 100 orcs were training their bodies. Ever since Victor Empire had built the city, there had been an endless stream of orcs coming from all over the north, and even Aladia. In the end, most of them chose to settle down here. Nahi, I just heard you talk about our changes. Can you tell me more about it? I'm very interested. Save Kent asked. Senior, you know that after moving to Victor City, everyone's life has changed a lot, right? Nahi said. Tanlutin nodded vigorously. He was aware of this obvious change. Yes. Victor City has issued a lot of laws and regulations. Our lives are no longer as casual as before. It's more orderly. At first, it was quite sad, but later on, I realized that we have more time every day. Save Kent listened quietly. That's not it. Nah, he shook her head and interrupted. What I mean is that the orc's schedule has become very regular. Up until now, we have gradually adapted to these rules. Take myself as an example. I usually sleep at 21 o'clock and wake up at 5 o'clock for 8 hours. Good habit. Save Kent nodded. But recently, I realized that my sleeping time has been increasing. For the past 10 days, I have been recording every day. Nahe pulled out a form and said, Senior, look, from 5 to 5:08, 5:17. He only woke up at 5:30 today. My father's condition is even more obvious. I've asked many students in the past 2 days, and they seem to have similar conditions. More generally, other than students, the average sleep duration of the orcs has also increased. Tanlutu opened his mouth. That's unbelievable. Hearing his companion's exclamation, the orc raised his neck proudly. Indeed. What I'm saying is, you actually record how long you sleep every day, and you even ask others about it. How free are you? Is the course too simple, or the practice too easy? Idiot, this is called applying what you have learned. Nahi rolled up the form and showed it to Tanlutu. The knowledge taught by the teachers can be used in all aspects. That's right. Sukaner watched the two of them bicker for a while before smiling and nodding at Nahe. He praised, keen insight is the foundation of becoming an excellent warrior, and insight doesn't only exist in battle, it's also the same in life. As a mixed-blood orc, it is really rare for you to be able to notice this. Please don't misunderstand. Nahi, I am not biased against your bloodline. Mixed-blood orcs are also excellent and have many advantages that ordinary orcs do not have. But this time, many of the changes are not obvious in mixed-blood orcs. As for you, as a pure-blood orc, as she spoke, she turned her gaze to Tanlutu. You should have noticed these problems before her, but Tanlutu, you don't seem to know anything. Tanlutu could only smile sheepishly. Senior, do you know the reason? Nahi observed her expression. You were once trapped in this world, and now you are free of the chains. Save Kent said solemnly, then paused and smiled at them. This is what His Majesty the Emperor said to us. If you want to understand, you have to first familiarize yourself with the history of the orcs. Here we are. Save Kent looked up at the tall dragon statue of the Imperial College and greeted the other students. Then he walked up the steps to the Imperial College campus of Victory Imperial College. Victory, the last capital of the Skalan dynasty, was rebuilt on the old site. Behind Save Kent, countless orcs walked up the steps. The sun shone on their backs, and in an instant, it was like 1,000 years ago. Chapter 484. Luke Bach hid in the snow. As an Enruk, he wasn't used to the cold and humid climate of the eastern mountains. However, he had to force himself to calm down. The army of the sea folk was right outside. While the invisibility spell could fool their eyes, it might not be able to fool their ears. Luke also knew that the sea folk had a type of hound with a keen sense of smell. If he was discovered, he would be done for. He watched as the army of sea folk left amidst the rumbling sounds before he let out a long sigh of relief. He slowly relaxed his tense body in the snow. His back was sore, and his limbs were numb from maintaining the same posture for so long. He couldn't help but groan. How did this happen? Luke Bach thought about it, and felt that the fall of Myrnin a few days ago was a complete tragedy. Over the past few eras, the sea folk had never displayed such a strong combat prowess. After clearing out the coastal areas, they were like a hot knife through butter as they marched towards the Golden Pearl of Villister. The defensive line formed by the various tribes of Mainan was easily destroyed by the sea folk. After that, the sea folk began to violently cleanse the tribes that resisted. Their methods were far more bloody than the rumors about the Golden Pearl. However, they seemed to be looking for something. Luke felt that his body had recovered quite a bit. He slowly retreated and hid in a small puddle. After observing for a while, he held his left arm with his right hand and endured the pain. He slowly pulled out a black bone spike from his forearm and stabbed it into the ground. His forearm was bleeding profusely, and it blended into the murky snow water. Soon, the puddle formed a small whirlpool, and the mud at the bottom twisted, gradually forming a simple charm. The next day, it was time for the spell. Luke noticed that his body was glowing red. The light appeared from his left arm and spread throughout his body. The sea folk deserved to die. Luke's face revealed an expression of excitement and realization. Holding a dagger in his hand, he raised his head and was surprised to see waves of flames erupting in the distance from the army. He began to run in the opposite direction. Along the way, he saw the silhouettes of his companions emerging from the snow and water. They didn't communicate with each other and ran in silence. Their speed was far beyond the limits of Philistinians. The war has been going on for 2 years. The sea folk have pulled the front line from the Dead Sea to the west of the Audiobook Mountains. No matter how strong they are, the sea folk supply system can't withstand such pressure. Try your best to avoid their armies and attack their supply lines. Keep wearing them down. These sea folk won't be able to hold their ground in Vilost. We will definitely achieve the final victory. Some time ago, the Golden City had invited many tribal leaders to make this statement. This also meant that the Golden City had officially declared war on the Sea Clan. The Blackwing unit soon discovered the abnormality of the war. The unit suffered several high-intensity attacks, and a large number of supply troops were killed. There were traces of enemy activity at the rear, and there were even situations where the stronghold was lost. As a commander of the army, Garen attached great importance to this matter. Through analyzing the information obtained, he was certain that this was an organized strategic plan, and this time, the enemy had supernatural powers. To take down the well-trained and well-defended Blackwing stronghold, this was not something that a few dozen or a few hundred Velostans could do. The military camp entered a state of emergency. The Blackwing unit's quality was superior, and they had rich experience in dealing with supernatural powers. After all, in Iradia, the Blackwing clan belonged to the category of supernatural monsters. Garen quickly came up with various plans to deal with this kind of power and quickly stabilize the situation. It's the Golden City's hunting unit. That night, Automo took the latest information from the investigation and said to Garen, who was sitting cross-legged in the open with a serious expression, "Your Highness, the Golden City has joined the war. According to the natives who are loyal to us, this army is the Golden City's God's blessing unit to fight against a powerful foreign organization. They just understand the rules of Vilost and know how to use some supernatural powers. God's blessing unit, huh?" Garen revealed his teeth and pulled a sarcastic smile. If this continent could use magic, then we would be gods. Although his attitude was full of contempt, Garen was still quite cautious when it came to the specific deployment of the battle. He asked, "How strong are these guys?" According to the natives, out of every 100 Velostans, there will be one warrior who can bear the god's blessing. According to our investigation, Their strength is not inferior to an adult demon hound, and their combat ability may be even stronger, Automo said. Contact the island base, increase the strength of the supply unit, and increase the defense of the stronghold. Garen thought for a moment and made a decision. We will continue to push forward. The stronger the resistance of these natives, the more they want to stop us, which means that they are more afraid, Garen continued. The victory of a small-scale battle will have little impact on the overall situation of the war. In the front, no matter how hard these natives try, they will not be able to stop the flood of steel unless the tanks run out of energy. Garen had full confidence in the Blackwing Empire's steel troops. If he could push forward, he would. However, at this moment, a battle lizardman in black armor rushed in front of him and saluted without waiting to report. "Your Highness, something has happened." "What?" Automo stood up abruptly. The battle lizard man was sweating profusely and said with a hoarse voice, "Curse. The Orc tribe and the Goblin tribe have people who have been cursed. They're unconscious and trembling. The Black Shirt tribe also has a similar curse. The priests and spellcasters do not have the ability to dispel it." Automo was so shocked that he took a step back and shivered. Is it a curse, a poison, or an epidemic? The battle lizard man moved his lips but did not speak. Originally, Iradia did not have the concept of an epidemic. However, after the popularization of the Blackwing Empire, some humans gradually learned this knowledge. However, the battle lizard man was a monster with low intelligence. He did not know the difference between the three and only described the situation as it was. "Don't panic." Garen's expression did not change. He did not even stand up. "Bring in a case for me to see." Soon, a cursed goblin was brought in. Along with him were a few spellcasters, priests, and a new profession in the north, the witch doctor. "What did you find?" Garen lowered his head and looked at the goblin, who had a painful expression and was twitching all over. "According to our judgment," the witch doctor said, "it should be some kind of undiscovered poison." "Where did the poison come from?" Garen asked. In Eladia, poisoning the troops was a very low-level method because it would be easily healed and dispelled by spellcasters and priests. However, it was indeed possible to implement it in Villister. Garen had also considered this point and had already taken precautions. The native tribes that had been summoned would never be able to come into contact with the Blackwing clan's food. The possibility of the Empire's own people poisoning them was too low. "In the food," the witch doctor said. "A few logistics teams came back with supplies after being attacked by the natives. However, there are problems with the food and water here. Poisoning in battle. Can the natives do it to this extent? The natives who are hiding behind us can use a supernatural power called Blood Curse to assist us," Automo explained. Because of the shortage of food, the army did not check the supplies that could be safely sent back. The ones who were poisoned were the natives who ate a lot today. Now, more than 20 of them have died. They are all goblins, the battle lizard man reported. "How many natives were poisoned in total?" Garen asked. "About 4,000. Most of them are goblins and humans. There are also some beastmen. The demon hounds and wyverns only showed signs of discomfort," the battle lizard man replied. "Move the natives who were poisoned. The witch doctor will go and research the antidote." "Battle lizard man, help me wake Her Highness Blakesia up," Garen said. "Inform all the camps to prepare for battle." "Her Highness?" Seeing the black shirt attendant leave quickly, Automo asked in confusion. "Our sentry didn't give any warning. Since they thought of poisoning, do you think the enemy won't have a further plan?" Garen looked at him coldly. "Don't underestimate your opponent. The Vilas civilization's development is not high, but it doesn't mean they are stupid." Chapter 485. A strong wind surged from the plains in the south, as sharp as a blade. Bonfires were lit in Blackwing's camp. The blazing flames dragged against the wind, dyeing the entire plains a fiery red. The battle lizard men held crossbows and stayed in the sentry post, vigilantly observing the wind and grass in all directions. The cannons and ballistae were already in place, and the tanks were on standby. Accompanied by the wyverns, Garen climbed up a low slope. The well-trained orc soldiers did not appear, but quietly made way for the prince to climb up to a vantage point. In the endless plains, this low slope was the highest point of the camp. Looking down from above, the plains around Blackwing's camp seemed to be densely covered by ants. As these ants crawled, the entire ground wriggled and undulated. "So many people," Blakesia exclaimed softly. With a simple glance, one could roughly estimate that the number of tribes participating in this battle was probably more than all the previous expeditions of the Empire combined. However, the plains were unusually quiet. These natives were silently carrying out some kind of order, gathering towards Blackwing's camp. "It's indeed beyond my expectations," Garen said in a low voice. "But the natives are using those primitive weapons. I'm afraid it's not enough to rely on this siege to defeat us." "What about their blood curse? How do you plan to deal with it?" Blakesia asked. "Deal with it as usual." "What do you mean?" "In the Empire's army, Iradia is the best in terms of combat ability. Do you think that Ordoronso's clan has no experience in dealing with supernatural forces? If they were on another continent, they would be supernatural forces themselves," Garen explained. "Then let's see what these natives are going to do." After saying that, the mother dragon raised her slender neck. The natives stopped 700 to 800 steps away from Blackwing's sentry post. A series of bonfires were lit in the Wilrish tribe, and the half-naked natives holding stone spears could be vaguely seen shouting something. Then, 10 natives formed a group and slowly pushed out a crudely made catapult. Next, someone in the tribe used blood as a curse, and a blazing fire rose into the sky, forcing the winter's chill to retreat and illuminating the plains. They slowly pulled down the long arm of the catapult, and the other end of the arm was a blazing fireball burning with blood. After a series of muffled sounds, countless catapults around the camp were launched at the same time. In an instant, flames broke through the air, and hundreds of fireballs pierced through the dark night, landing in the middle of Blackwing's camp. "Blakesia," Garen said in a low voice. One of the fireballs was facing the short slope, and that fireball was wrapped in a black substance. It was like a huge meteor falling from the sky, and a scorching heat wave hit them in the face. As soon as Garen finished speaking, the mother dragon let out a muffled roar. She tightened her limbs and swung her tail, and the tip of her tail collided with the fireball. The fireball collapsed under the impact, and the burning debris scattered in the explosion, as if it had been raining fire. The mother dragon twisted her neck and shook off the ashes on her body. "You're so useless. You still need me to protect you." Blakesia's physique had always been better than Garen's. In Wilrist, where talents and spells could not be used, the difference in their physiques was obvious. If they were to fight here, 2 Garens would probably be Blakesia's match. If that fireball was wrapped in a hard rock, even a giant dragon's body would probably feel pain. But now, Garen could see clearly that the burning fireball was a black substance that looked like oil mud. It was emitting black smoke, and there was a faint smell of blood and an indescribable special smell in the smoke. Other than the flames, the fireball also brought thick smoke that covered the space. "If this goes on, our long-range troops won't be able to aim," Commander Otomo said. "There's no need to aim, just let them attack," Garen said. "Inform the cannons and tanks to attack indiscriminately at the areas where the natives were discovered. Fire all the ammunition." The catapults were still firing, but Blackwing's counterattack had already begun. The cannons started firing more ferociously than their opponents. The tanks also started moving after a round of bombardment, waiting for the cannons to end. They were ready to crush the main battlefield under the cover of the demon hounds and orcs. After Otomo left, Garen looked through the thick smoke at the Blackwing camp in the distance. He rubbed his head against Blakesia's neck. "Actually, I'm not sure either. There was no one around." Garen's dignified and confident expression disappeared. He rubbed Blakesia's ear and said softly, "We know too little about the so-called Golden City. On the contrary, through the Coastal War, our opponents are already aware of our strength. Under such circumstances, their decision-makers still decided to start the war and surround us. Do you think they're recklessly staking everything on a single throw, or are they waiting for a fatal blow? From the looks of it, you seem to have considered this point before. Blakesia turned to look at him in surprise. After Garen nodded, she asked, "Then why are you still urging the troops to advance and not consolidating your own territory?" "What can I do?" Garen explained in a low voice. "Ordoranzo is pressing for the dead iron material. I've checked. It's a kind of sacrificial material. There are very few of them along the coast. Most of them appear in the central continent and are controlled by the Golden City and some large tribes." "Oh, so you can't wait to attack inland?" Blakesia sneered. "He's the emperor in Iradia, hugging the mother dragon and sleeping soundly. The two of us are suffering in this damn place where we can't even use magic. You idiot. Now you're even selling your life to Caesar." Garen stared at the battlefield that was gradually boiling. Flames danced in his almond-shaped vertical eye. He breathed in the whistling wind mixed with thick smoke. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "I've said it before. Ordoranzo has been good to us. I have to do something for him." The atmosphere froze for a moment. Blakesia suddenly slapped him on the head. "All right, stupid pig. Show some of your previous attitude. Look at your useless face. When we were just born and saw Sylvia, you didn't do anything. I was scared out of my wits." Garen smiled foolishly. "My mind was blank. I followed Ordoranzo like an idiot." "Didn't you follow too?" Blakesia raised her head. The whole camp was filled with smoke, and everything around them was in a sea of fire. "It's spectacular. My teeth are starting to itch. Let's show these ignorant natives that even without talent and magic, a dragon is still a dragon." Garen nodded. "Let's go. I won't have time for you later." Blakesia retracted her wings and rushed forward. "Remember what you said. Don't die here." Chapter 486. Garen Nefadius stuck his body close to the ground and moved forward in a snake-like manner. His natural talents and magic had lost their effectiveness, and the potential of a dragon's body that stood at the top of the food chain burst forth. His body began to adapt to the environment, and in just 2 years, Garen's body had become much more flexible and stronger than before. The arrows and flames in the sky increased, and the enemy's reinforcements were approaching the camp with bows and spears. But Garen could hear their commanding officer frantically shouting to attack and to continue the attack. Garen licked his lips, and his heart thumped like a drum, pumping his magma-like blood into his limbs, causing the flames in his chest to burn even more fiercely. In front of the clan tribe, he was a dignified and quiet officer of wisdom. However, he would only reveal the true Garen Nefadius when he was galloping on the battlefield. At the end of the day, he was a Penishade dragon, an evil dragon mixed with the bloodline of the powerful red dragon. What was hidden under all kinds of disguises was a cruel and bloodthirsty heart. He liked to watch his enemies wail and bleed before dying painfully. Only then could he slightly ease the desire to destroy in his heart. Which evil dragon didn't want to use his fangs and claws to show off his power and enslave living creatures? But Garen had always done so, because he had always lived under the shadow of the Black Emperor. His brother was the famous Caesar Tangerine, and compared to him, everything he did was insignificant. He continued to suppress his desire until this mission, which was a gift from God. His brother gave him the order to conquer Vilost, so he could repay his brother's trust and also indulge himself. Running forward was the wall of fire. The Black Dragon was a good swimmer, but he was not immune to fire. But Garen couldn't care less. He suddenly stood up, and his shoulder and leg bones moved back and forth, turning stealth into running. The moment he reached the fire pile, he tightened his waist and abdomen and jumped over it. Before the natives had time to adjust their bows, arrows, and spears, an attack as fast as lightning swept across. The iron chains wrapped around the train began to bubble and corrode like barbecued butter, emitting a pungent smell. Then they broke. The suspension bridge lost its tensile force, and the upper half of the bridge collapsed. Immediately, it fell to the ground with a bang. He didn't have any natural talents or magic, but the strong acid in the black dragon's saliva was innate. Garen knew how to use it when he was just born, and of course, it was the only thing he could rely on now. "Stop it!" the native leader shouted at the top of his lungs in the crowd, and the Vilas language was very harsh to Garen's ears. Garen turned around and took a deep breath. This was the sign of the dragon's breath, but he couldn't use it, so he just wanted to use this method to make the acid splash further. Although it required a lot of stamina, and the accuracy was not high, but in Vilas, just this kind of acid was already very dangerous. The natives at the front fell in a row, and it was still okay if they were hit by arrows or cannons. But the acid splashed by a black dragon with a body of 18 meters was enough to corrode flesh. Those who were hit screamed in pain, and some decisively tore off their armor and skin or ruthlessly chopped them off with a knife. Seeing this, the native leader stood up. 3 of the train had already fallen, and if the other 2 were destroyed, their attack point would be considered a failure. Not only would they not be able to complete the orders of the Golden City, but they would also be attacked single-handedly, and their tribe would be ridiculed to death. Garen turned around to look at the train, but the stone spears that were thrown at him from the sky couldn't be ignored. Finally, a powerful javelin hit his left shoulder, and the impact forced the black dragon to retreat, and blood splattered everywhere. "It's just a beast," the leader shouted, and the natives' morale was instantly boosted, and they all moved forward. Although he didn't understand what the other party was saying, he guessed that it wasn't anything good. Garen gritted his teeth. How can I be stopped by these powerless natives? The scene of Ordoranzo burning the city wall with his own power flashed in his mind, and Garen jumped into the air, dodging a bunch of javelins. He completely gave up on adjusting his body and dove down with his head, opening his mouth and spitting acid. Clang! The iron chain broke, and the train's arm fell with a clang. The target was eliminated, and Garen fell to the ground, rolled, and took 2 arrows head-on, and went to the next firing position. The leader's mind was blank, and he watched the other party disappear quickly. After a long time, he finally remembered what Black Dragon was going to do next. Inform the other tribes. Are you sure? Caesar had shrunk his body and was nestled in a huge iron chair. Hogg was reporting the battle report of Vilas to him. Yes, the battle report came from the Com Belt's transfer department, and we've confirmed that the situation is correct, Hogg said. How can it be? Caesar questioned. From the previous battle report, with the combat ability of the Iron Legion and the Blackwing clan, as long as the commander doesn't give orders carelessly, they will not be defeated by the Vilas natives. And from the previous battle report, Garen is undoubtedly a qualified commander. It's indeed hard to believe. Hogg stood by the brazier and said, however, the Vilas natives used supernatural powers, and the local ruler, the City of Gold, sent a special force called the Hunters. The battle report states that the force cut through steel and claws like a sharp knife, cutting through cheese, and pierced through Prince Garen's army. Don't compare. Caesar knocked on the table unhappily. I want to hear the detailed battle report. Yes, Your Majesty. Hogg cleared his throat and said, 5 years and 2 months after the ocean conquest plan was announced, on the 13th day, our main force was ambushed in the Thane Plains. After a short period of military judgment, Prince Garen decided to counterattack. At first, we had an overwhelming advantage, but when the enemy's hunters and divine guards appeared, the situation was reversed, and our main force suffered heavy losses. After that, Prince Garen made a prompt decision to abandon the Battle Lizard Men and Flying Dragon Legion and cover the Iron Legion's retreat. It was only then that the main force realized that the main stronghold had been conquered, and they were surrounded again. After 5 hours of battle, the 5 armies, including the Demon Hounds and the Beast Men, were defeated, and about 32,000 of their people died or were captured. The conquering army lost more than half of its members, but Her Highness Black Shia took back the main stronghold in the end. The army suffered heavy losses, but they can still fight. Hogg paused for a while before saying, however, the current predicament is that His Highness Garen's whereabouts are unknown, and Her Highness Black Shia can't fight alone, so we are already in a defensive position. Also, in the area east of the main stronghold that we have conquered, the tribes that have surrendered have heard the news of our defeat at the front line, and they are gradually becoming restless, and there is a possibility that they will rebel. Therefore, the conquering army has officially asked for help from the Empire. Garen, Caesar muttered to himself for a while, and turned his head to look at the empty palace, and asked, "What do you think those divine guards are? Also, what kind of place is Vilost?" Chapter 487. In the shadows behind them, the terrifying eyeball slowly floated over a distant memory. Wait a moment, the other continent to the west, you call it Vilister, don't you? In fact, before the Quell Dorii era, that continent was not separated from Iradia. In the first 100,000 years of this world's birth, it did not have its current name. We called it the Gondia Plain. Gondia was originally just a tiny speck of dust in the vast astral plane, unremarkable. But unexpectedly, it gave birth to a powerful race, Quell Dorii. This race's technology was unusually advanced, breaking through the boundaries of the natural order. Apart from using the most famous summoning spell to lure dragons to Gondia and enslave them, they also developed their technology to the spiritual plane, using space-time consciousness to communicate with beings of the past and future. I know all that. Caesar interrupted the eyeball in dissatisfaction. In the end, they played with fire and attracted Tiamat and Bahamut. That's right. The Eye of Gush was not angry at being interrupted and continued, but after the destruction of Quell Dorii, Gondia started another war. Tiamat and Bahamut fought fiercely on this plane, and each called for their allies to come to their aid. Please recall what I said before, 100,000 years after the birth of this world. At that time, Gondia's energy level was not as weak as it is now, or Quell Dorii would not have developed to the point of enslaving ancient dragons. Back then, its energy level was defined as strong, and it was quite tolerant of external forces. Do you know what that meant? It meant that the gods, abominations, and evil beings could unleash their greatest power here, and Gondia instantly became a battlefield for the gods. That kind of war is completely unimaginable to these material beings. At this point, Corgi, the Eye of Geosh, glanced at Hogg, seeming rather pleased with himself. In the end, Gondia was torn apart. The continent turned to dust, crumbled into chaos, or sank into the deep sea. In the end, the planar consciousness was forced to activate self-protection, banishing the gods and lowering its energy level. The awakening of the planar consciousness meant that Gondia was finished. The current Iradia is nothing more than a civilization that was reborn on the wasteland. The Titans, the dragons, and the many races that appeared here all originated from the seeds of fire that were sown at that time. I had a history lesson. Caesar clapped his hands. Although Corgi's nagging had satisfied his desire to explore the origin of the world, the black dragon was still not satisfied. You mean to say that Vilost and Iradia are one? If that's the case, why are the civilizations of the two continents so different? And what's with the law of death magic in Vilost? In the same plane, the rules will always be the same. This is the iron law of the astral plane. Vilister and Iradia are not separated by dimensions, and you actually think that the laws of the continent under our feet are different? Corgi sighed. How ignorant and foolish. Caesar did not speak. He reached out and grabbed the tentacle of the Eye of Gush, spun it twice, slapped on the ground, and stepped on it. After a while, he let out. Speak human. Corgi floated up dizzily. Although there was no real damage, it was not good to be beaten up. It restrained itself and said, "What we can be sure of is that Vilost and Iradia are the same. Since the basic laws here allow magic to exist, it must be the same over there. As for why the situation reported by this null happened, I don't know. Let's go." Because he despised the Eye of Gawush for being too slow, Caesar grabbed the eyeball and sped away amidst Corgi's random cries. It's beyond my expectations. As they said, the energy in this area is very strange. It's not lacking, but the flow is very sluggish. After arriving at Vilost, the eyeball stretched out its tentacles and felt the surrounding environment. Its energy level is the same as Iradia, but the characteristic of the sluggish flow of elements makes it almost impossible to sense and use them. This is a pseudo-magic-free environment. In this case, shaman culture can only be born here at most. A few people with energy affinity can use supernatural powers in special ways, but they can only use them. They can't even control them. Caesar was also observing. After crossing the calm belt of the Realm Sea, he could not use psionic power to distort his will. The disguise failed immediately, and he returned to his 70-meter-tall giant body. This guy did not land at the Empire's coastal military base immediately. Instead, he planned to explore the situation himself. After all, first-hand experience was always more accurate than hearsay information. "Can't find a clue?" he asked Corgi. The eyeball shook its head and did not speak. As a divine artifact, Corgi's combat ability was not outstanding. In comparison, Caesar valued its other functions more. As a part of Guish's body, although Corgi had developed self-consciousness late, it shared all the memories of Guish before it was separated from the eyeball. In other words, putting aside its combat ability, there was a young true god standing beside Caesar. It was easy to imagine just how troublesome and rare a situation that could confuse a main god was. "Looks like there's something." Caesar lowered his head slightly. Standing on all fours, he was able to reach a height that allowed him to overlook the entire primeval forest in front of him. After a long time, Corgi said seriously, "There should be something blocking the flow of energy and setting up something like a second-level rule. But to block the flow of energy in the material plane, even a true god would have to do his best, and it wouldn't last long. It's hard for me to imagine what that thing is. Maybe there are other possibilities. No matter what, if you plan to explore, I suggest you start the journey of destruction directly. Start with the land under your feet as the starting point and push all the way. Anyway, your army plans to conquer this continent. In the end, that thing might surface by itself. Even if we can't find any clues in the end, you won't lose anything. At the same time, you'll complete the plan of conquering Vilost, right?" Corgi said excitedly. It was really the style of doing things that Guish, the main god of the orcs, had inherited. "If it was when I was young, I would definitely reject your words directly." Caesar glanced at it, touched his chin, and said, "But now, I have to say that this plan is quite to my liking. Now, let's go and solve Blakisha's problem first, and then find Garen. Then let's start." Corgi was eager to try. But let me say this in advance. My divine power was originally limited by the rules of the world. After coming here, I became even more lazy. You have to pay attention and protect me. Got it. I can't let you die just because you've been given a name. You haven't told me what this name means. It sounds quite nice. Chapter 488. The sky was torn apart, and lightning fell through the twisted cracks. What followed was a black, icy rain mixed with smoke and dust, the smell of steel and sulfur, and the howling of a storm that seemed to come from the abyss of hell. Luke got up and tightened the blood-stained bandages on his body. Although these things were already damaged, he still hoped that these bandages could protect his internal organs before everything was over. "We should continue attacking," he muttered, using the handle of his spear to support his body. A hand suddenly grabbed Luke's ankle. "Get down, idiot. If you die now, what will you use to fight later?" He looked at his companion, a beardless man wearing half a leather armor. Through his curly wet hair, his companion's brown eyes were full of pleading. "You can lie down yourself," Luke muttered. "I've had enough of lying down. 5 days. We've been hiding in these dog holes for 5 days, sleeping on our own feces and blood every day. Can't you hear the sounds of the other tribes fighting at the front lines? I can see it all." He stared into the distance in the heavy rain, wanting to see the situation in front of him clearly. "Death is greeting you," his companion said. "That's what you should see. Get down quickly. Don't worry, it'll be our turn soon. The last time we attacked, I lay down for 7 whole days. I'm tired of crawling with my stomach on the filth. Ruin, we're trained to stand and fight. We're the warriors of the city of gold, not poisonous snakes hiding in the shadows. Luke said, I want to find my opponents, those who can make blood flow and break bones. Those green-skinned sea creatures with fangs are pretty good. Maybe. Ruin's suppressed voice came from behind. But there's a high chance that you'll encounter those sea creatures and burning fireballs. That's why we dug these trenches to serve as our graves, Luke said disdainfully. Luke mocked disdainfully before adding, even in this rain filled with the stench of urine, I can still see smoke rising from the ground. God King above, how many more of those steel monsters that are as sturdy as fortresses are there? They're coming. Ruin did not reply to him. Instead, he suddenly shouted and pulled Luke to the ground, burying his face in the rotten mud. The next moment, the gray sun above their heads disappeared, and a roar that sounded like the roar of thousands of wild beasts pierced through their heads. Under the torrential rain, fierce flames exploded on the ground, and smoke rose in all directions. The two people in front of them who didn't have time to dodge fell into the mud with a bang. They lost their heads, and their bodies were torn apart. Blood gushed out from their necks. Damn sea race, Luke roared in anger and frustration. How many more of these weapons do they have? The rain became heavier, and Ruin pressed on his shoulders. There won't be too many. A lot of them were destroyed by the hunting troop last time. I'm guessing it'll be our turn soon. Luke propped himself up with his hands and found that the soil was unusually moist. A sticky and slightly sweet liquid flowed into the trench. It was as deep as a finger. It was fresh blood, a river of blood. Vague shouts came from the front, accompanied by the roars of wild beasts and hysterical screams. 2 hours later, the tribal warriors in the trench finally received orders to advance. Luke stopped at the front of the trench, which was half his height. He could see the black walls of the castle in front of him and the hole at the bottom of the castle. In order to get it, they had spent nearly 7 days and paid with the lives of 3 large tribes. Now, we only need to take a few light steps to reach the indestructible wall and the unbreakable door, Ruin said. The sea race has lost, and our victory is in sight. Who says the sea race is unbeatable? Luke was also encouraged. He said to the people behind him, Listen, warriors, there's no such thing as Egon. We only need to kill those 2 black lizards, and everything will be over. It was dark. The huge figure blocked the sun and pierced through the clouds. It swept across the battlefield with a burning aura. The rumbling sound caused by the airflow made everyone look up. The black behemoth gradually descended. Its mountain-like body made most of the natives who were ready to charge so weak that they could not draw their bows. Caesar landed in front of the castle. The strong wind caused by his wings blew those who were close to the castle into a whirlwind. A large number of natives who could not dodge in time were turned into bloody mud under his feet. Caesar destroyed a native tribe with one landing. The monster stood on the ground. Its 70-meter-tall body stood on 2 strong hind legs. An equally strong tail swayed in the air, balancing the huge, ferocious head and sharp forelimbs. Roar! The rumbling sound was like thunder rolling on the ground. The black dragon used a deep and powerful roar to spread across the entire battlefield, announcing his arrival to Vilost. As the monsters roared and breathed indiscriminately, groups of natives began to flee or collapse to the ground. Even their tribal leaders began to flee. The camp was trampled into a mess. All the fences had been pushed down. The battlefield was filled with dark-skinned natives fleeing in disarray, as well as wyverns, demonic hounds, and beastmen who began to recklessly pursue them. If the natives were more organized, they might be able to reduce the losses. But they could not. In front of this unbelievable monster, the warriors of the tribe could not suppress their fear and tremble, even though they had been tested by the flames of war for a long time. Egon! Egon! Everything is over. Atuso, please give me strength. Chaotic voices came from the natives' camp. The battle ended the moment the black dragon arrived. The native army began to flee in all directions. Because of the language barrier, Caesar strangely found that the natives did not seem to have any intention of surrendering. So he began a merciless slaughter. "How cruel," Corgi said, hovering beside the black dragon's ear and looking at the natives who were crying and running at his feet. "I remember that Guish is not a good god. Do you have a right to say that?" Caesar said calmly as he continued his destructive actions. The natives did not organize any resistance at all. Besides, resistance was useless at this time. "No," Corgi replied, "but I still want to congratulate you on your first victory. It's worth mentioning that the native creatures in this place are weaker than I thought. Look, this is the so-called blood curse at your feet." Luke clenched his dagger and tried his best to suppress his trembling legs. His cheeks puffed up as he gritted his teeth and looked up at the terrifying beast that was descending from the sky. The black dragon's attention seemed to be attracted. It suddenly stopped and looked down, just in time to see Luke standing motionless at his feet. It took a step back, bent its neck, and lowered its head to observe carefully. Luke clenched the wooden dagger until it creaked. Only then did he realize that he was only the size of the monster's eyeball. That huge head was no less than a city wall to him. The monster was looking at him. "Egon," Luke swallowed and tried his best to speak. "There is indeed nothing to study." Caesar squashed the little person in front of him. "I don't understand what these people are saying." Chapter 489. The hurricane swept across the land, causing sand and stones on the bare ground to fly, setting off a frenzied tornado. The Aborigines wailed. Their instinctive desire to survive drove them to flee frantically. Fortunately, most of them did not lose their minds. They did not run back blindly because it was a vast and flat plain. There, they would be completely exposed to the monsters behind them. There was only one way out, which was death. Like prey being hunted, they hid behind all the cover they could find, such as rocks, trees, supplies, and even corpses, trying to find a way to survive. But this time, the predator they were facing was not a lion or a tiger, but a demonic dragon. The howling wind gushed out from under the wings of the black dragon. It opened its mouth, and flames gushed out from its mouth. It brushed across the ground, and in an instant, it set off a monstrous mountain fire. The fire grew bigger and bigger, and gradually, with the black dragon as the center, it became a semicircle with a radius of hundreds of meters. The flames rose from the ground, and the smoke rose into the sky. The animals fell to the ground, and the howls of the natives gradually turned into weak prayers and cries for help. They frantically took off their clothes, struggled with their burning bodies, and crawled out of the fiery hell. But halfway through, they all fell to the ground and turned into a pile of charred bones. The fire grew bigger and bigger, and the black dragon was still breathing. The surging flames connected the sky and the earth. A flame waterfall hundreds of meters high appeared out of thin air in front of May's castle. It flowed from bottom to top, and the black dragon's iron-like body shone brightly. In May's castle, Blakesia's mouth was wide open, and her eyes were wide open. Her heart was filled with excitement and complicated emotions. She stared at the black dragon behind the flame waterfall without moving, as if she had turned into a statue. Before this, what she saw was Caesar's disguised and shrunken form. No one would have thought that Iradia's black dragon monarch could have such a huge body. It was a miracle that had never happened in the prime material realm. "Egon, Egon, it's coming with iron and fire." Further away, the natives who did not participate in the battle watched the incredible monster descend from the sky and burn the powerful army of the allied forces into ashes. They all stared at the looming shadow of the dragon on the other side of the flame wall in fear and awe. It is the Terminator of the world. Almighty Atuso, although he was very far away, Prophet Pooh's body couldn't help but tremble. The extreme fear made him subconsciously pray to the God King that he hadn't prayed to in a long time. Although he had already seen the Death Star passing through the World Star and approaching Vilos from the Learning Tower, he had been prepared for it. But who would have thought that when the Death Star really came, it would be such a shocking scene? It was hard for Guapu to imagine that there was anything that could really stop the destroyer of worlds. Even the City of Gold would not be able to escape the fate of being burned to ashes in front of it. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and turned to look at the other prophets sent by the temple. He thought that perhaps only the king of gods, Atuso, would descend. Otherwise, this world would be doomed. Guapu thought over and over again. Suddenly, he felt a chill in his heart. Egon had stepped out of the flame wall and looked around with his golden, cobweb-like eyes. Suddenly, he focused his gaze in his direction. It can see me? It's so far away. Impossible. Guapu raised his guard and unconsciously shrank his body. If the Death Star really noticed this direction, everyone present would be dead. It's coming. The next moment, under Guapu's terrified gaze, the destroyer of worlds rose into the sky. Its wings covered the vast sky and cast a shadow that was big enough to cover the city. It swooped down and flew towards the prophet station. It saw us. Guapu's mind was blank. He screamed and jumped down the hill. The people around him were even worse. They rolled and crawled. The first thing in their minds was to escape. These prophets from the City of Gold, who were worshipped by the natives like gods, couldn't even summon the will to resist. The strong wind pressed the trees to the ground. The prophets and the temple guards also staggered. When they came back to their senses, a huge shadow had already covered their heads. Guapu stared at the shadow under his feet in fear. His heart felt like it was being squeezed, and he couldn't breathe. He realized that Egon had appeared in front of them. Oh! A strange sound came from above, like two thunderclouds colliding with each other. Can any of you understand my words? Sea race language. Pai Pu thought that this was the language used by the sea people and sea beasts. Because he had interrogated a lot of sea people captives, he could hear some characteristics of the pronunciation of this language. Somehow, he bit his tongue and cast a blood curse, trying to understand the language of the destroyer of the world. In Caesar's vision, the ant-like people below him kept quiet out of fear. None of them replied. He snorted and asked again, "Can you guys understand what I'm saying?" "Yes, yes." Guapu stretched out his hands and waved, shouting loudly. "Hey!" Caesar, who got a response, lowered his head and bent his neck close to the people. During this time, his surging breath made Guapu and the others stagger. When these people stood up again, he said, "Can you understand my words?" "Yes, yes." Guapu nodded repeatedly. Since Egon was willing to communicate, it meant that he didn't come purely to destroy the world like the legends said. Subconsciously, Guapu thought that he might have a chance to survive. Of course, he should try his best. "Where's my brother?" This was Caesar's first question. "Brother? It's that black male dragon." Caesar explained impatiently. The prophets took some time to understand Egon's description. Guapu thought about it and suddenly remembered the black lizard in the siege last time. He was a little hesitant because Egon said that it was its brother. However, that black lizard, although very smart, was not on the same level as the monster in front of him. Garen Nephidisius. Guapu hesitated and said tentatively, "You know his name?" Caesar nodded. "Where is he?" Guapu didn't dare to speak. He couldn't tell the world terminator in front of him that the Sea King was captured by the temple guards and dragged back to the City of Gold with chains. If that happened, Egon would probably immediately go and destroy that city. However, before Guapu could think of an excuse, Caesar had already asked again. "He was captured by you?" Guapu didn't dare to speak. Caesar's voice became dangerous. "Don't tell me he was killed." "No, no." Guapu's sixth sense trembled. He knew that the situation was not right. He could only explain truthfully. After the last battle, the Sea King was captured by the temple guards and has been brought back to the City of Gold. We didn't do anything to him. We just wanted to get information about the Sea Clan from him. Garen Nephidisius' life is not in danger. That's still okay. Caesar thought. Garen must have suffered a lot. "I know," Caesar said. "I'll let you go back alive and bring my brother back safe and sound. Also, inform your masters that all the natives of Vilost under your control are to immediately give up resistance and surrender to the Blackwing Empire. Help the Blackwing Empire take over everything on this land." Fortunately, they escaped with their lives. The prophets didn't dare to say anything and immediately fled to the city of gold. It was only then that Corky the eyeball came out again. How do you know that they are the masters of this land? I don't know. Caesar shook his head. I just saw that these guys were a little stronger than the ordinary natives. I guess that they might have some identity. I didn't expect it to be true. It feels a little wrong. How many people did you kill just now? Why did you suddenly let these guys go? It doesn't fit your ruthless style. Corky didn't understand. If you don't leave a few alive, who will spread your name? Caesar choked on his laughter and stared in the direction where the natives left. Didn't Guish do this before? Understood. Chapter 490. Of course not. Great sage Cruzin yelled at the kneeling prophet Persei. In the center of the temple was a statue of a Thuso made of corundum. The statue was majestic and deep. It was a serious-looking Westerosi with a straight nose, thin lips, and sharp eyebrows. It gave off a feeling that mortals should not get close to it. Athuso's left hand hung down naturally, and his right hand held the hilt of a long sword. A dark red gem was inlaid on the hilt of the sword. Around the prophet, the black-clothed prophets stood silently, their faces shrouded in a wide hood. They lowered their eyes and stood motionless on both sides of the statue. From the perspective of the prophet, the cold posture of the great sage was no different from that of a stone statue. He was silent for a moment and said, "But that is Aegon, the destroyer of the world." Foolish judgment. Aegon is not a mortal thing. It appeared to open a new cycle of reincarnation. It is a supreme existence worthy of our reverence. The great sage looked into the prophet's eyes. And the monster you speak of is just another twisted and filthy sea beast. If it is not Aegon, the prophet said, then why doesn't the great king of gods send down his divine power and crush these evil sea creatures? Blasphemy. The scepter hit the ground heavily, making a muffled sound. Do you think God is our servant? God created us, let us speak and walk, and gave us life and wisdom. Now, you are blaming God for the incompetence and failure of mortals. Are you blaming God? The prophet trembled when he heard this. He realized his mistake and immediately bowed his head in repentance. I know the Golden King will not agree. Why should we obey the orders of a foreign race? The great sage said. Then he relaxed his tone and leaned forward. I know that the strength of that beast has shaken you. You feel fear, right? The prophet did not dare to answer and touched the ground with his forehead. Fear is a good thing. The great sage said, you are not the first and will not be the last. Mortals' thoughts are based on their barren flesh, so it is easy to feel fear of those strong and fierce. This is also the reason why the temple exists. We are on the path of pursuing Athuso's sublimation. With God's blessing, there is no need to talk about fear. So you're not afraid? The attendant asked in a probing tone. Of course. The great sage nodded. The path of pursuing God's blessing has never been severed, but only the most devout and tenacious prophets can pass the test and receive the supreme divine power. Papu raised his head and opened his eyes wide. He had served in the temple for half his life, but he had never heard of such a thing. He asked in a trembling voice, can I accept the test of the King of Gods? You? The great sage shook his head. Why? Why do you want Athuso's protection? You've already shamed the prophet and made the temple lose its dignity. The entire city of gold despises you. Papu lowered his head and didn't say anything. In fact, he wasn't as devoted to the divine king as he had imagined. However, when he saw the black dragon destroy the entire horde army with his own eyes, Papu's spiritual world was greatly impacted. He was afraid of such a monster, but in the depths of his heart, he yearned for that omnipotent power. The great sage looked at him kneeling on the ground and said, mortals who aren't tenacious enough may lose their lives in the test. Do you have the resolve to not care about life and death? Papu didn't say anything. His yearning for power seemed to have been magnified countless times by the great sage's words. That yearning almost made him tremble. He paused and said firmly, I don't think any of the prophets here are more determined than I am. "Stand up," the great sage said. When the prophet stood up, he looked at him meaningfully for a while, as if he could see through all of the prophet's thoughts. After a while, he said, "Because of fear, that's why you yearn. Mortals are like this." The great sage suddenly raised his voice. "Are you willing to pursue the supreme path, even if you have to pay the price? Even if your blood runs dry and your flesh turns to ash, you still want to accept this test?" "I am willing." "Stand down," the great sage shouted. This sentence wasn't directed at him, but Papu knew, because after the great sage finished speaking, the black-robed prophets on both sides immediately retreated into the shadows of the temple, as if they didn't exist. At the same time, some kind of will descended. It was an indescribable experience. A turbulent power poured in from the outside, squeezing the soul little by little to the edge of the body. In the next moment, invisible steel needles seemed to attack from all directions, piercing through the skin, twisting inside the body, from the brain to the internal organs, from the muscles to the bones. "This is what you want, power," the great sage said faintly. At the same time, it is also a test. Papu endured with all of his willpower, his hands toward his chest. His throat made a muffled sound similar to drowning. A powerful force poured into his body. The bulging blood vessels turned from blue to red and finally burst. Papu couldn't help but howl. The prophet's skin began to peel off piece by piece, revealing his dark blue muscles. The prophet was like a suffocating fish, his body curled up into a ball until his eyeballs burst. White mud-like tissue covered half of his face. He could no longer make a sound. "Papu has failed." The great sage stood up with the help of his scepter, coldly looking at the unrecognizable body on the ground. A mortal whose body is not strong enough, whose willpower is not firm enough, did not complete the supreme test, so he died. A faint sigh came from the temple, like the whisper of a ghost. The great sage took 2 steps forward, placed his hand above the pool of flesh, and held it in the air. "But you have proven your sincerity and won my respect. Papu, you fell on the path of pursuing a Tuso, and I will finish this journey for you." He withdrew his hand, stood in front of the blurred flesh, closed his eyes, and opened his arms. The turbulent holy power poured into his body from all directions. After a long time, the great sage took a deep breath and opened his eyes again. His skin was as smooth as a baby's, and there was a warm radiance flowing over it. The sound of the horn came from afar and floated into the temple. Today was the day of the execution of C. Clan Garen Nephidisius. In the central square, the soldiers had already put him into a cage. The abominable beast was writhing, covered in blood, and the chains were strangling him so that he could not make a sound. Hundreds of slaves were shouting and pulling him into the air. Crews came to the outside of the temple and watched the iron cage slowly rise. When the horn rose higher and higher, everyone's eyes were focused on the central square. Some were the nobles of the Golden City, some were ragged, and they were refugees from other tribes. Golden King was surrounded by layers of guards in the army. He was wearing a gray armor with a leather cape embroidered with golden threads hanging down from his broad shoulders. His breastplate was inlaid with a roaring lion. Above his eyebrows was a crown made of pure gold, and the top of the crown seemed to be intertwined with flames. In the cage, Garen Nephidisius tried to tear the chain on his neck with his claws, but it was in vain. He growled and cursed what he saw in front of him. "Forget it." The great sage Crozan thought for a long time and finally said, "Inform the Golden King that the temple wants to keep this beast alive. Now." The prophet next to him looked at the scene in the central square. Everyone was waiting for the moment when the firewood was lit. If the Golden King was stopped at this time, the situation would not be good. "It's more useful alive than dead," the great sage said. "But didn't you say that the monster outside is not Egon, and we don't have to submit to it?" "Did I say that we have to submit to it?" Cruz tilted his head and said, "I only said to keep the beast. I didn't say to send it away." This, the prophet did not understand. "I will go to Mystic Grace personally and wipe out the alien race for Vilost," Cruz said, "but if I fail, I don't want the Golden City to be destroyed." Chapter 491. Caesar lowered his altitude to avoid a dense rain cloud. After getting used to the environment in the north, he did not like the humid air of Villister. He lowered his head and saw the gray-brown figures of the natives flashing through the forest. Caesar was a little surprised when he heard that Cruzan had invited him to meet. According to the investigation, this name was quite famous in Villister. He was the leader of this generation of the temple, the leader of the prophets that the natives worshipped. He was known as the Great Sage, and his position was similar to the ruler of this land, the Golden King. It could be seen that this great sage was braver and more decisive than expected. Therefore, Caesar gladly went. He needed time to understand the local situation, the reason for the existence of a law of necromancy, and what kind of power this so-called prophet leader had. These questions would have a big impact on the Black Dragon's ruling plan. As he approached the meeting place, he saw the team from the City of Gold. What came into view was the grand altar of the god Atuso. Under each of the 16 white jade pillars engraved with prayers, there was a prophet dressed in black. Under the tallest pillar, the great sage Cruzan was sitting quietly in a white robe. Atuso, does this guy really exist? The natives call him the God King. Caesar hovered in the air and looked around. From afar, he could see the little people sitting in a circle. The only one who could be called the God King is our father, Oro. Cordy sneered. What is Atuso? I have never heard of him. He is either a figment of the natives' imagination or a second-rate evil god. The strange thing is that the population of Villister is not small, and the willpower it can provide is not low. Caesar was puzzled. If Atuso does not exist, then so far I have not found any god sowing faith here. Our calculation was wrong. Cordy sighed. As the lost corner of Gondia, Vilost was almost melted and scattered to the other end of the deep sea. We thought that there would be no more activity on it. We didn't expect it to give birth to a civilization again. Speaking of which, life is indeed an incredible miracle of the universe. Even God isn't omniscient and omnipotent about it. Understood. Caesar nodded. Let's go down and take a look. I really don't understand why you care so much about these humans. You said you were going to start a journey of destruction, but now you've changed your mind. The ceremonial officer secretly glanced at the great sage who was resting with his eyes closed. He then turned around and waited angrily. Just now, a sentry reported that he had seen the mystic dragon. He thought that the mystic dragon should be here soon. From his point of view, it was too embarrassing to welcome a marine race beast with such a grand lineup. The other party had slaughtered dozens of tribes, yet he still had to be courteous. Sometimes, he really didn't understand what the great sage was thinking. I am the king's ceremonial officer. No matter how ferocious the sea tribe is, they cannot make me show my weakness. The ceremonial officer thought to himself as he recalled the description of the king of the sea beasts. Suddenly, Caesar blocked out the sunlight. The rumbling sound waves arrived first. Then, the dragon wings rolled up a gust of wind that flipped the flag. The black dragon landed with a loud crash. The ceremonial officer's mouth was wide open. His knees were trembling uncontrollably. When he faced the existence that he needed to look up at 90 degrees, all his thoughts stopped at the same time. The only people who had really come in contact with Caesar, other than the natives who were lying in the graves, were those who accompanied him. Caesar glanced around. His majestic eyes caused uneasiness and panic. The ceremonial officer opened his mouth and forgot what he wanted to say. Cold sweat kept dripping down from his forehead. No matter how much mental preparation he had in advance, the pressure of facing a mythical monster was unimaginable. Fortunately, their great sage helped him to speak. Cruz walked forward and said, "Nice to meet you, king of the foreign race." Caesar lowered his head. "You know our language?" "A little," Cruz said, in order to understand the enemy. "Where's my brother?" "Garin Nephidisius." "He's fine. We agreed to return him to you, but you have to show some sincerity." Cruz said calmly, "Levi lost." "Ho-ho, you're negotiating with me?" Caesar was amused. He let out a rumbling laugh. Then he lowered his body and stood on all fours instead of 2 feet. His huge front claws were on both sides, covering everyone. The huge dragon head looked over. Do you think I was joking when I told those prophets? Or do you think you can threaten me by relying on Garen? The negotiation failed. Cruz didn't say anything. He had expected this outcome, so he didn't waste any time. The battle began. The great sage roared. He took out a sharp sword from his scepter and rushed forward at an extraordinary speed. His loose robe fluttered violently. The sword brought along a strong gust of wind as it slashed towards the black dragon's neck. Caesar was surprised. Looking at his opponent's attire, he thought that the great sage would use his scepter to cast a spell or something. That way, he would be able to see the specific rules of the death magic zone. He didn't expect this so-called great sage to rush at him with his sword. Was he going to fight a 70-meter-tall monster in close combat? Bang! Just like a fly hitting its target, Caesar calmly swung his dragon claw at the great sage from top to bottom. Cruzin hit the ground hard, and the sound of his bones cracking could be heard clearly. Cruzin then rolled away and floated away. Caesar narrowed his eyes. The great sage immediately got up. With the physique of a humanoid creature, his spine should have been broken and all his ribs shattered. However, Cruz didn't seem to have suffered much damage. The great sage didn't feel any pain. His powerful strength washed over his body. His bones and muscles quickly healed as he moved. He thought about the dragon's attack just now and rushed forward again. Caesar looked at them quietly. Every little bit of difference in these strange aboriginals would give him a better understanding of this land. The great sage looked like a powerful legendary warrior, but his movements were clumsy and rough. Caesar swung his dragon claw again, ready to send him flying. The silver emblem flashed in Cruz's eyes. The clumsy prophet suddenly turned into an experienced veteran. He used irregular teleportation to close in quickly. The long sword in his hand was flipping nimbly. He used dazzling trajectories to affect the opponent's judgment. As the dragon claw swept across, the great sage twisted his waist and changed his position in mid-air to dodge the attack. What greeted him was a mouthful of dragon flames. Cruz fell from the sky with flames. He was upside down, kicking up a cloud of dust. That's it. Caesar picked up the great sage with his two claws, as if he was pinching an insect. The great sage's vitality was quite tenacious. He was not dead yet, but he seemed to have lost the ability to move. 34 times. Haven't you had enough? Corky couldn't help but complain. The prophets' faces were paler than silk. They prayed while trembling. Sweat dripped down their hair. They wanted to escape, but they didn't dare. With such strength, how could he have the courage to negotiate with me and attack me? Caesar shook his head. Is it hard to understand? Corky said, because of ignorance. Before you appeared, he might have been the strongest being on this land. He had never failed. He didn't understand what it meant to be stronger than him. Just like the Tullowed realm. After developing the ability to travel through space, it was ready to conquer other realms. However, it was destroyed by a mechanical nation in the neighboring Sil cluster. It doesn't matter. It's worth noting that although he's weak, he has his own energy system. You've seen it. Caesar held the great sage in front of him and observed carefully. Suddenly, the half-dead Cruz opened his eyes. Chapter 492. Suddenly, the half-dead Cruzin opened his eyes. No one could have predicted that the torrential spiritual energy would suddenly burst out and instantly cross a very short distance. Ignoring the protection of the dragon scales and the powerful magic resistance, it took the opportunity to crash into Caesar's brain when he was relaxed. Strong flesh may be able to block arrows and spears, but not thoughts. Cruzin said in a low voice. The spirit sea was the internal expansion of the soul. It carried the memories, emotions, and consciousness of a creature. Everything it thought would be reflected in the spirit sea. The spirit sea of a knoll or a farmer would only be a crumbling cave or a few square feet of land. That was all the spirit sea of such creatures could carry. The spiritual sea of a powerful life form was much vaster than this. But for Caesar, his spiritual sea was a boundless blue sky and a vast and majestic black sea. At the critical moment, Cruzen realized that he could not defeat the enemy, so he decided to give up his weak body and concentrate all his consciousness to enter the spiritual sea of the enemy. There was no doubt that this decision was correct. If there was a chance to blow up the spirit sea of this giant beast or awaken its soul, Cruz would not only be able to defeat his opponent, but he would also be able to seize his opponent's powerful body. With the terrifying strength of that body, it would not be a problem for him to drive away the Sea Tribe and even help the Golden City to conquer the Sea Tribe. For Cruz, the high risk of no return was directly proportional to the huge reward. It was totally worth the risk. He had successfully completed the first step, which was to break into the spiritual sea of the behemoth. However, what he faced next was completely unexpected. The color of the sky began to change, and the light emitted like a star emblem. The spiritual sea gathered and finally formed the shape of Cruzen. He looked around, and his calm face finally changed color. His lips trembled, and he could not help but whisper, "How is this possible?" The next moment, the sound of rolling waves came from the sea. The sound was heavy, and waves kept rolling on the surface of the sea. The sky suddenly changed, and bright lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating Cruzen's gloomy face. After the thunder, there was a short silence. A series of huge bubbles emerged from the sea, each of which was several times bigger than the one Cruzen showed in the spiritual world. The whole sea began to rumble and tremble with a strange, evil aura. A huge black dragon appeared. Every claw of the dragon was as long as a mountain peak, and every scale was as big as a lake. When the dragon opened its mouth, the distance between the upper and lower jaws occupied the entire field of vision of Cruzen. The dragon breath that was as wide as 10,000 miles washed over the entire spiritual world. Although it didn't cause any substantial damage, it was enough to make Cruzen collapse. "It's magnificent, isn't it?" The voice came from all directions. In the spiritual world, there was no concept of language. The two sides communicated through their consciousness. The side with the absolute advantage could even read the thoughts of the other side. "You're very lucky. Before this, no creature has ever dared to break into my spiritual world." Cruz didn't listen to him at all, because when he saw this scene, he realized that what he was doing was tantamount to suicide. He immediately wanted to withdraw and escape from the spirit sea, but there was no doubt that he failed. When facing an undefeatable creature, one should maintain sufficient respect. Caesar said lightly, "You should at least listen to what I have to say before you think about how to escape." Cruzen was speechless. He already knew that his opponent had the absolute advantage and could read his thoughts. And this kind of control was even more fatal than controlling the life and death of a physical body. Until now, what I don't understand is where your power comes from. According to the intelligence of the Blackwing clan, Villister doesn't have a complete energy system. This means that you can't obtain power through meditation or training. However, you seem to be different from the rest. Of course you're not an idiot. Since that's the case, you still chose to bare your teeth at me. Either you have great confidence, or you don't know the difference between you and me. Regardless of the reason, it's enough to show that you don't understand power. You only know how to use it, but not how to obtain it. You don't even understand the rules behind it. From the Divine King, Arturo, stop joking. I've asked, you can barely be considered a true god. There's no such person among the gods. But your thoughts won't lie. That means that that thing has indeed given you power. Caesar was stunned for a while before he grinned and said, "I understand now. There's something unusual in Vilost that's deceiving the natives of this continent. You, on the other hand, are nothing more than a puppet." The body of the Vilost man, who was known as the Great Sage, trembled. He knew that in front of absolute power, there was no need for this giant beast to deceive him. But if what it said was true, then he had been deceived from the beginning. Everything he had persisted in and pursued in his life was laughably false. His faith was shaken to an unprecedented degree and was on the verge of collapse. Cruzen felt that his organs had been hollowed out. His limbs were weak, and he was exhausted. He stared at Caesar's face without saying a word. "It doesn't feel good to be fooled, right? I can feel your anger. Black Dragon said, "What the so-called Arturo can give, I can too. You've seen my power and know that it's easy for me to conquer Vylos by force. But actually, I don't like war. As a great sage with a high status here, help me persuade the City of Gold to surrender and rule over Vylos, and I can give you more things. I might even give you a chance to take revenge on Atuso. How about it? Think about it." After a pause, Caesar added, "My daughter is about to be born. I don't want her birth to be accompanied by bloodshed, and I don't want to waste time in this place. Maybe I've been fooled, and I'm angry about it." For the first time, Cruzan spoke in the mental world. "But this is not a reason for me to help you. Indeed, with your power, it's easy to conquer Vylos. But you can break our spine, but don't think you can bend it. From now on, I'll be the first brick in your grave." He self-destructed. Cruzan's spiritual energy gathered and disintegrated, creating a torrent of energy. Then, it was dispersed by Black Dragon and returned to silence. In his own mental world, Caesar was an omniscient and omnipotent god. He had the ability to stop Cruzan's self-destruction, but he didn't. Because the moment Cruzan entered the mental world, Caesar already knew that Cruzan had no intention of living. He had rushed in with the determination to die. Even if he stopped him now, he would still launch a suicide attack when he returned to the material plane. There are always these idiots who don't know what's good for them. Caesar sighed softly and returned to the matter plane. He looked at the other people who were as silent as cicadas in winter and felt that it was boring. He left a sentence, "Send Garen back," and left. Chapter 493. Unexpectedly, even after the death of their leader, Cruz, the City of Gold still refused to return the hostages. More than 1,000 native tribes in the center of Vilister, in addition to the Divine Guards, bronze warriors, and slaves of the City of Gold, gathered together in the name of resisting the invasion of the foreign races. They formed an army of more than 200,000 soldiers and set up camp in the east of Embark City. The actions of the other party had completely enraged Caesar. Before this, the Black Dragon's attitude towards war was to avoid it if possible. Although it was inevitable that war would break out between the two sides due to the exploitation of resources and labor, Caesar's general policy was still to conquer Vilister with conciliatory means as much as possible. However, after the other party had repeatedly disobeyed his will, he had decided to eliminate all resistance from the other party, just like how he conquered the other countries in the north. Looking at the native army that had gathered in the distance, Caesar narrowed his eyes. If the leader of the other party had the slightest bit of self-awareness, he would not try to rely on this rabble to resist the power of the Blackwing Empire. Perhaps the leader of the City of Gold had received the support or coercion of something, forcing them to continue fighting against the Blackwing Empire. Atuso. At dusk, the natives organized an attack. The large-scale army was chaotic and noisy, fully demonstrating the terrible social organization and collective quality of the tribal civilization. In comparison, even the ordinary feudal lord's army in Eladia was much better than this. To be able to gather an army of more than 200,000 strong, it could be seen that the City of Gold, the leader of Vilister and the holy city in the eyes of the tribesmen, had considerable influence. This was almost all the forces that could be gathered in this land in a short period of time. It was 3 times more than the expeditionary army of the Blackwing Empire. However, the advantage in numbers was not the decisive factor. Compared to the fully equipped Blackwing army, this was still a rabble. The slaves with brands on their necks began to build crude siege weapons. The thick wooden stakes were dipped in blood and painted with all kinds of strange and tricky patterns. Under the enhancement of the blood curse, they were thick and hard. In the distance, hundreds of topless old men with white hair and no eyes gathered together. They used drums and horns to play a low and distant war song. In Caesar's vision, in that area, slow and obscure energy was slowly flowing, converging, and then erupting. It actually opened up an area where energy could be used in this death magic area. When Black Dragon saw this, he became slightly more alert. The native army pushed forward, and a large number of thick and hard wooden stakes were built as a bridgehead. The natives had chosen the vanguard through a unique ritual of Vilister. Unlike Iradia's slave suicide squads, the vanguard here could only be led by strong warriors. In a civilization that didn't have much development, the values of martial prowess were ingrained in every tribe. 20,000 warriors in the front took off their shirts. Behind them, the prophets cast all kinds of unrecognizable stimulations on these warriors with blood curses. These warriors roared loudly, stepped on the wooden stakes with their lithe bodies, and ran towards the top of the wall of the bridgehead as if they were running on flat ground. The native army at the rear relied on their previous experience of fighting the Empire to launch long-range attacks like Blackwing. Catapults, war bows, lances, and all kinds of other weapons flew up the wall and began to suppress the manticores on the walls with long-range firepower. In fact, they were more like being suppressed. The manticores and wyverns guarding above them dealt with the situation rather casually. When they saw the half-naked natives charging up, they didn't even take them seriously. The manticore spiked tails quickly pressed down on their opponents to the point where they couldn't even raise their heads. The wyvern's saliva caused the natives to slip and fall from the sky before they could do anything. Those who were closer to the ground were better off. They took the opportunity to roll to the side and still had a slim chance of survival. However, those who were a few steps away from the top of the city wall fell to their deaths. The few lucky ones who were lucky enough to survive couldn't escape their fate. Soon, they were smashed into meat paste by the various weapons falling from the top of their heads. However, there were exceptions. Some of the stronger native warriors, when they felt their feet slip, actually jumped on the ground and used a difficult long jump to reach the top of the wall. However, the wyverns and manticores couldn't wait for a free meal. When the wyverns saw this scene, they immediately rushed up with saliva dripping from their mouths. It was obvious that the war would continue for a long time. This was only the first contact. Caesar knew that the vanguard didn't have any other reinforcements. The army that caused Garen's defeat hadn't appeared either. The true elites of the native army were sitting on the high platform. Caesar used his suppressed senses to check and found that the enemy army had strength close to legendary. The war was still ongoing. Black Shia, who was stationed at the bridgehead, climbed up to the top of the wall and roared angrily. She had brought the orcs with her. Barrels of waste, mixed with kerosene, were splashed from the top of the wall. They fell from the sky and splashed onto the faces of the survivors who were struggling to climb back up the wall. The flames burned, and the bridgehead was soon filled with the smell of burnt bacon. Screams spread from there. On the crowded city ladder, no matter how many people there were, it was futile. The huge military force had no choice but to be divided into small streams and then torn into pitiful pieces. Amidst the horrifying screams of the dying natives, accompanied by the muffled sound of iron axes hitting oak wood, the wooden stakes of a city ladder were soon set ablaze. It was unknown whether it was the setting sun or the scorching flames, but the army and the city tower were coated with a layer of red light. As time passed, the dusk grew darker. Smoke filled the air. The situation on both sides became more and more chaotic. Amidst the sound of metal clashing, the cries and howls gave way to moans and wails. The vanguard of the natives was completely defeated and suffered heavy casualties. This success caused the allied army of the natives to change their strategy. The results of the probing undoubtedly proved that this vanguard was not easy to take down. If they wanted to truly threaten the monster behind them, they had to first break through this barrier and cut off its claws. The commander, sitting in the middle of the allied army, gave an order. The hunting squad and bronze warriors of Golden City stood at the front. Black Shia, who was on top of the city wall, looked at the hunting squad that appeared in front of her. Her expression became solemn and serious. She naturally recognized these people who caused Garen's failure. But fortunately, she did not feel much pressure because she knew that if there were any problems, Caesar would be behind her. What she needed to do was to show her claws as much as possible and prove to the Black Emperor that she and Garen had the ability to rule Vilost. A new wave of natives charged towards the top of the city wall. The main force was the hunting squad and the bronze warriors. They did not rely on the blood curse and completely ignored the flames on the wooden stakes. They ran towards the city wall as if they were flying. At the same time, under the cover of the flying dragons and the manticores, the Blackwing heavy cannon with a shocking caliber was slowly pushed up the stone tower amidst the dull rotation of the bearings. Chapter 494. The warrior leader of the second attack, Katanak, was a veteran of hundreds of battles. The scars on his upper body boasted his bravery as a barbarian. In the early years, he was a member of a barbarian tribe. He once killed the Horton giants in the Silent Swamp and piled up their corpses to build a bridge. Later, he was favored by the Golden King. Finally, he was glorified in the temple and became a strong bronze warrior. Katanak wasn't surprised by the failure of the vanguard's probing attack. This wasn't the first time they fought with the Sea Tribe, and he knew how cold-blooded, powerful, and arrogant they were. However, Katanak didn't think that this army could stop the Golden City from attacking the Sea Tribe King. Any decent army wouldn't have a hard time dealing with the motley crowd that they had encountered earlier. This only proved that the enemy was still vigilant and didn't let down their guard. Katanak was confident. As the strongest warrior of the 10 tribes in the area and the leader of the bronze warriors of the Golden King, he was one of the strongest in the Golden King's army. Now that he had the support of the war drums and the prophet, his will to fight was very strong. He believed that he could defeat any enemy in front of him. Even if it was the mythical king of the Merfolk, he didn't fear it. After all, he was the one who captured the king of the Merfolk, wasn't he? When the dragon wings covered the sky and descended from the sky, Katanak's burning desire to fight cooled down slightly. He knew that these winged creatures could pose a threat to him. This army was also one of the strongest of the Merfolk. Katanak didn't know that he had become Blakesia's first target. The beast's intuition was sharper than the natives. Even though Katanak didn't stand out in the army, his vigorous blood aura showed that he was a powerful warrior. Even Caesar noticed his existence. As an epic creature that the Philistines could not understand, Caesar could easily perceive things that were worth paying attention to through his hunting instincts. This time, he was suddenly interested, so he activated the combat ability assessment device, which he rarely did. He scanned the bronze warrior's power, collecting information, analyzing data. A large amount of information was gathered and condensed into a visual assessment panel in his right eye. Analysis result: carbon-based life form. Overall combat capability assessment, 1120-1310. According to the judgment of Iradia's profession, this was a super warrior who had crossed the threshold of legendary. He was at the peak of human beings in all aspects. If he was matched with good equipment and buffs, he would have no problem killing an ordinary army of less than 1,000 people. He was definitely the best of the best among human warriors. Even in Iradia or other planes, he could be regarded as a super killing machine. Although the other bronze warriors had not crossed the threshold of legendary, their combat ability values were roughly between 500 and 700. At this time, Caesar was secretly glad that Garin did not rush directly into the Golden City when he came ashore. Otherwise, if the opponent had a strong trump card, they might be caught off guard and completely wiped out. Relying on his powerful strength, Katanak quickly led his troops to defeat the flying dragons that swooped down and climbed up the walls of the bridgehead. However, after that, the expected situation of the enemy being defeated by his courage and strength did not happen. On the contrary, his opponent put him in danger. The heavy armor and the giant axe were not a bluff. Katanak stared at the hateful fanged beastman in front of him and realized that his opponent's strength and agility were not inferior to his own. In the first clash, he was careless and almost fell off the wall. His opponent was more than twice his size. It was not that Katanak had not encountered opponents with large bodies before. The most typical example was the extinct Horton giants. Those giants were also strong and tough, but their slow bodies made them full of weaknesses. When Katanak faced them, it was like an agile leopard teasing a group of slow pigs. However, it was different this time. The one standing in front of him was like a brown bear. What was more terrifying was that this brown bear was wearing heavy armor and was not slow at all. Gaul did not have a legendary weapon like Hog. His weapon was always an ordinary heavy axe. However, as his strength increased, the handle of his weapon became thicker and the axe became bigger and bigger. When the heavy axe hit Cardinex's shield in a hurry, the huge force instantly sent the super warrior flying to the battlements. With a muffled sound, countless bricks and stones fell from the battlements and rolled down the wall. Monster! Cardinex looked at the broken shield in his hand and was a little frightened. This was definitely not a normal humanoid creature. Agile cheetahs could use all kinds of methods to kill sluggish domestic pigs, and they could also deal with wild boars. However, it was not easy for cheetahs and brown bears to fight in the arena. The Beastman is back. The monster shrouded in iron walked forward and clenched its fists. It growled in a language that Cardinex could not understand. Restore the glory of our ancestors. From now on, until the end of time, we will win every war from now on. The loud noise Cardinex's strong body made when he hit the battlements seemed to be a signal that indicated that the second round of attack of the allied army of the City of Gold had reached a stalemate again. They sent out many of their hidden aces, such as the aerial throwers who rode on strange birds. However, they were unable to move at all under the pincer attack of the wyverns and manticores. There were also the elite bronze warriors and hunting squads. However, they were firmly restrained by the beastmen who had removed their shackles. Even the blood-cursed prophets, who had more room to fight, were forced to retreat under the accurate attacks of the Blackwing heavy cannons. The anxious battle situation made the headquarters of the allied army of the City of Gold silent for a while. They quickly realized that the strength of the enemy had also increased. The vanguard formed by the elite troops could not even break through the walls of the bridgehead, let alone face the epic behemoth. They were a little annoyed with their own carelessness, but there was nothing they could do. The order from the top came too suddenly. The Golden King kept persuading them to launch an all-out war against the Sea Tribe at this time. The Golden King was the spokesperson chosen by Atuso in the human world. In this era where divine power was greater than anything else, no one dared to disobey his orders except for the great sages who had already passed away. The headquarters sounded the horn and decided to launch an all-out attack, hoping to gain something before dawn. These guys did an arithmetic problem. If the bridgehead only had this number of troops, even if it was powerful and difficult to deal with the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the allied army of the City of Gold, there was no reason that they could not destroy a small castle. However, when the allied army of the City of Gold sounded the all-out attack, Caesar also saw everything he wanted to see. He did not have the patience to continue waiting. Although the Blackwing clan was born for war, there was no need to let all of them die in a war. The Black Dragon decided to join the battle. Before Caesar appeared in the field of vision of the natives of Veluste, the Combat Ability Assessment device updated his data. Scan analysis result. Energy Compound Life Form. Comprehensive Combat Ability Assessment. 7,800, 9,100. Chapter 495. What was the peak number of 9,100 in the verification device? In the current data of Iradia, the number of legendary creatures was stable at around 1,000, and the threshold for demigods was 5,000. Only extraordinary creatures like the Abyssal Lord Asliers and the near-god level Lich Aglarin could have battle power comparable to Caesar in the material plane. In the history of Eladia, there were very few historical records of battles with monsters of this level that could be used as reference. Scholars and researchers from all over the continent theorized that in order to deal with the Black Dragon Emperor, they would need at least a team of more than 10 legendary warriors. But in reality, Caesar was not an ordinary humanoid. With his power level and energy level, coupled with his inexplicable magic resistance, he would definitely be a doomsday boss in a game. If a battle were to be waged, a group of 80 legends with a clear division of labor and reasonable allocation would be needed to pose a threat to the guy. Also, that was under the circumstance that he was alone and did not bring any family or servants with him. Otherwise, he would have to reconsider. A loud boom came from the horizon. In the incomparable storm, a huge object appeared in the corner of the sky. The natives of Vilost looked up at the same time and saw the terrifying creature in the sky. They all fell into a daze. From head to tail, Caesar was more than 70 meters tall. When his huge wings spread out, it seemed to cover half of the sky. After the Empire's reconstruction, May's city scale was not small, but now it seemed to be completely covered by this monster's iron wings. The black dragon's body was not pure black. Its body was decorated with many colors, including the golden arcs on the edges of its scales and the dense red patterns on its chest. However, with so many colors mixed together, it was very harmonious and did not appear exaggerated. It looked full of a metallic texture and aura. The indigenous prophets carefully observed the monster that was approaching from afar. As the distance shortened, they gradually sensed a rich life force and terrifying power under those thick scales. For a moment, they trembled. Just as the natives below were in an uproar, Caesar had already launched his attack. Flames gushed out from Caesar's mouth, followed by frost and lightning. Although the death magic of Vilost countered all supernatural creatures, these breaths were abilities granted by Caesar after his organs multiplied. They did not require any energy to drive, and were undoubtedly the best choice for large-scale attacks. These breaths landed on the Allied forces outside the bridgehead and immediately caused a lot of damage. The eyes of the great prophet of the vanguard changed. He immediately shouted for the soldiers to resist and retreat in an orderly manner. Then the hundreds of thousands of soldiers gathered below the walls. It was already difficult for them to control the situation and transmit orders. To control the army, to do every detail, was not something that Iradia or Vilos could do in the current era. So, Caesar's simple breaths caused a lot of damage to the Allied forces of Golden City. Among the 300,000 strong Allied forces, there were close to 10,000 powerful fighters, more than 100 blood-cursed prophets, and more than 10 legendary warriors. But most of them were still mortals who had yet to break free from their shackles. Under Caesar's indiscriminate breaths, the first to suffer were the pitiful soldiers. Some of them were burned into charcoal, some were frozen into ice sculptures, and some were bathed in lightning and thunder and died on the spot. This monster was no different from a natural disaster. The ruler of Golden City was stunned by this horrifying and cruel scene. Although there were many conflict between the tribes of Vilos before, and these ignorant and primitive natives also had terrifying stories of eating the defeated people alive, such a large-scale battle that robbed lives like cutting grass was unheard of. Under that monster's breaths, mortals were no different from ants. To think that this monster is actually this terrifying. The commander next to him was almost suffocating. His eyes were wide open, and his fingers were trembling because of fear. The faces of the few respected prophets around him were also pale. Looking at the black dragon that covered the sky, they finally realized that their opponent was not a larger beast, but a life form that was difficult to predict with common sense. It was a natural disaster that could not be defeated by numbers. Retreat, retreat. The commander of the Allied forces made a prompt decision. He did not even look at Golden King's expression before he gave such an order. This guy was not something that the army could fight against. It was like a landslide, like a tsunami. Could the human army fight against such a mighty force? Now, whether it was Egon or not, it was already Egon. The Death Star, the Terminator of the world. The battlefield was even more chaotic. Caesar, who did not know that he had a new name, was still wantonly killing these small people. The route of communication of the Allied forces' orders had been destroyed. Most of the soldiers had already begun to flee before they received the order to retreat. Some natives who had fallen into a state of madness even slashed the people in front of them in order to fight for a chance to survive. God King Atuso, please save your people. Most of the clergy would choose to pray to the gods at critical times, and the prophets of Vilost were no exception. In fact, the more isolated and backward civilization was, the easier was to rely on the gods and ethereals. Moreover, in Vilost, Atuso had indeed given the natives a lot of feedback and gifts. At this moment, the army was in trouble. Even Golden King could only pray that the God King would take care of his people and save them from their current predicament. In fact, in his heart, he actually had a certain degree of confidence. When the great sage Cruzan died, Golden King received the news and was prepared to return the captives and negotiate a ceasefire with the sea folk. However, after that, he received a revelation and obeyed the oracle to launch a large-scale war against the sea folk. Now that the war was in shambles, the God King could not ignore it. In fact, there was indeed someone watching the battlefield and had been watching this war for a long time. Let's go with the Vilas civilizations, saying and call him Atuso. As the divine king of Elastans, Atuso was not afraid of this five-colored dragon from another continent. However, he did not want to directly show himself and compete with this dragon. His original plan was to use some means to reveal some of his existence so that this five-colored dragon would know the difficulty and retreat and bid farewell to Velastans. If things had developed this way, Atuso was willing to not pursue the matter and let the dragon leave. However, this dragon did not know what was good for him. Even though he had clearly guessed his existence, he still did not give up on conquering Vilost. When he saw the hundreds of thousands of allied forces in trouble, Atuso knew that it was time for him to appear. If the army that obeyed the oracle was defeated, it would undoubtedly be a great blow to the faith. He had to come out and clean up the mess. So, with a violent surge of the law of death magic, God King Atuso revealed his true form in front of his people for the first time. Chapter 496. At the end of the gloomy sky, a black dot suddenly appeared. Caesar stopped his actions and narrowed his eyes. He stared at the approaching object with a hesitant expression. Gradually, the black dot became bigger and bigger. It had already become a pitch-black disk and was still expanding. Not long after, the disk had expanded to several meters, 10 meters, dozens of meters. Not long after, the diameter of the disk had expanded to several hundred meters, almost 1,000 meters. Waves of tremors constantly came from the ground. The tremors became more and more intense. The Blackwings and natives who were fighting on the ground also gradually felt the tremors and could not stabilize their footsteps. It was as if a monster that was several times larger than the black dragon was constantly moving. Caesar felt the air getting colder and colder. The temperature was getting lower and lower. The flow of energy was also getting more and more obscure. It was as if winter was invading the earth. However, it was still summertime. There were still several months before winter. Then Caesar saw the thing that the natives were calling for. It was the god Atuso that they spoke of. It was a moving ship. It appeared from the other side of the sky and was getting closer and closer. The ship that was approaching was extremely huge. It was formed from flashing crystals. The dead iron that Caesar had been searching for covered its body. The energy well that was gushing with radiance and flames was towering and tall. It penetrated into the clouds. The lines on the ship's body crisscrossed, and lightning constantly lit up the sky. On top of the ship, there was a black magic stone that was getting bigger and bigger. The ship's posture was very strange. There were no propellers or turbines. It was as if it was floating in the air. From afar, the ship looked similar to the battleships of the Blackwing Empire. However, there were no turrets, decks, or soldiers on it. There were only energy wells that were gushing with radiance. Although it was covered in black dead iron, it was still fluorescent and very beautiful. On the ship, there were also thick chains that could only be encircled by a few hundred people. They were like ropes that pulled the masts. The ends of these ropes were connected to the black magic stone. When the ship moved in the air, the chains collided with each other and made clanking sounds. Even the air was vibrating and humming. It was incomparably heavy. As the ship approached, the land that it passed by was covered in a layer of frost. Be it the Blackwing clan or the natives, they were all stunned by this creation that did not seem to belong to this era. They looked up at the towering object that was thousands of meters above them and mumbled something that could not be understood. Caesar was also a little surprised. He had originally guessed that Atuso could be a false god or an evil god that had changed his appearance. Be careful, Black Dragon. Look, rumble, rumble. The ship that was unbelievably huge was slowly approaching this place. It seemed to be moving very slowly, but it could cross a distance of 6 to 7 miles every second. When it appeared in front of the Black Dragon, its size was dozens of times larger than the Black Dragon. The visual effect created by the comparison between the two was undoubtedly extremely shocking. The huge ship was getting closer and closer to the battlefield, and the cold air it brought with it was getting colder and colder. The living creatures curled up, and the corpses lying on the ground were being frozen at a speed visible to the naked eye. The blood that gushed out turned into deep red ice cones. It was hard to imagine what kind of country and what kind of creature could create such a magnificent creation. The scene was so grand and spectacular that the battlefield stopped fighting. The army forgot their orders, and countless soldiers looked up at the huge object in a daze. It's extraordinary. The Black Dragon stood tall on the ground and looked up at the huge ship. Looking at the black magic stone, he gave such an evaluation. This magnificent ship gave people an incomparable sense of oppression. Even he could not help but praise it. Dragon, you have successfully forced me to show myself. A loud rumbling sound came from the ship. It was not in the language of Iradia or Vilost, but in the dragon language that Caesar was most familiar with. Now, last chance, leave. What if I say no? Caesar frowned. He still did not understand what the other party was. The next moment, a majestic power that could shake one's soul erupted above his head. It was as violent as a flood, and its majesty was like the roar of heaven and earth. All the organs were crying in fear, and only the top of his head was left in the world. This is Dragon's aura? No, it is God's aura. Caesar looked up solemnly and saw an unforgettable scene unfolding above his head. In the aura of all things wailing, the huge dragon head of Io appeared in front of him. The nine-colored god's aura was like a tide, spreading out wave after wave. The material strength of the ground under his feet could not bear the weight of Caesar's burden. Large pieces of it cracked and collapsed. Before the fragments could collapse, they were crushed back to the ground by the god's aura. The brilliant god's aura did not allow even dust to raise its head. The whole continent was filled with power that did not belong to this world. Under the giant ship, all things bowed down. The god's Icorgi had already burrowed into the darkest crevice. Caesar was in a state of shock. He had imagined an unexpected situation, but he did not expect to encounter the will of the ancestor of all dragons, Io here. Under the suppression of the powerful god's aura, the fusion furnace in Caesar's body rumbled and operated. It shook his spirit sea, resisting the invasion of the powerful will. The existence above found that the black dragon did not kneel on the ground. It was furious, and its aura was even stronger. Dragon of the mortal world, worshipped the ancestor god. In Caesar's body, there were 3 divine fragments whose will had been erased. They were the god of the hunt, Malor, the platinum dragon god, Bahamut, and the mother of evil dragons, Tiamat. But in front of this monstrous god's aura, they seemed to have become weak and pitiful. Not only did they not help Caesar at all, but they also ran around in the furnace in panic as if they had met their natural enemy, urging him to submit and show their weakness. In the records of the astral world, there are only a few records of the god Io. The ancestor of all dragons was his only priesthood, but this priesthood was enough to prove the strength of this ancestor god. Even Pyro, the god of the sun, who possessed great divine power, could only bow in front of him. No, that's not right. The god of Io had died billions of years ago, and his divine duties have been divided among his children. Even if the will and divine might of the god of Io still existed, how could such a great ancestral god hide in Vilost and appear in an unknown ship? It's lying to me. Caesar let out a dragon's roar, and the bottom of his eyes was suddenly covered with spiderweb-like golden cracks. Then the energy of the fusion furnace surged out like a tide, and in his body the turbulent spirit sea stabilized. Countless glowing particles gathered in the black dragon's mouth. Spiderweb-like cracks appeared in the void around his teeth and spread out. The sound of explosions was endless. In the end, the particles gathered into a beam and went straight into the sky, colliding with a rolling giant wheel. The god's aura was immediately annihilated, and the law of death magic disappeared. Chapter 497. Boom! The thunder in the dark clouds became the black dragon's backlight, shrouding his face in darkness. Only the particle breath in his mouth was like a beam of light, disintegrating the battlefield. What word should be used to describe this power? Powerful, terrifying, spectacular. No, it was annihilation. The level 2 rules that shrouded the area were quickly annihilated. Even his space was peeling off like glass, forming a black hole that was difficult to look at directly. In fact, in Iradia, information about the Black Emperor had been thoroughly investigated. The whole world knew that his killer move was particle breath, but so what? When he began to breathe deeply and gather light particles, no one had been able to stop him until now. It was the same now. The tsunami-like, draconic might of the ancestral mountain disappeared as if it had never appeared. The magic patterns on the giant ship were torn apart, and the bottom was penetrated by the beam of light. With a loud boom, countless fragments fell down. In an instant, even the rules of death magic were defeated. But soon, the huge sorcerer's stone on the ship burst forth with light, and the rules were reformed, covering the area again. What kind of person could create a sorcerer's stone that could change the rules of an entire continent? Caesar did not know, but he knew that it was undoubtedly something good. The shield outside the hull was torn open. The black dragon raised his neck and flapped his wings to board the ship. The ship was big enough for Caesar to walk freely in his original form. The fog that shrouded the ship was blown away by the hurricane caused by the black dragon. A pair of eyes stared at his figure as he landed. Caesar had never seen such a dragon, or such a creature. Its head was like a blood-stained Deinosuchus, and a yellow spine spread to the tip of its tail. The scales of black, red, and purple were dense and thick, stacked on top of each other. The most eye-catching part was the dragon's wings, which were covered in layers of cuticles. It made one wonder if it could fly. The opponent's body was not small. Although it was not as exaggerated as Caesar's, it was still about 30 meters tall. At the claws of its limbs, he saw some steel armor with flashing magic engravings. Was this guy the controller of this ship? Before Caesar could ask, the opponent had already pounced forward with a howl. The intertwined cuticles of the dragon's wings suddenly spread out, and the two sides of the wings were like real waves. The figure became a roaring wave. Caesar only had time to extend his claws, and there was a solid collision with his chest. Caesar steadied his body, but the other party didn't even need to gasp for breath. His figure moved like lightning, sticking close to Caesar's armor. The next second, he appeared behind Caesar and grabbed at Black Dragon's neck. With a flurry of flames, the claws were like soldering iron that had been put into a furnace, burning red as they collided with the Black Dragon. Caesar reached out to grab his back, but the monster had already disappeared. When it reappeared, it was already above his head. Its battering ram-like tail smashed into the Black Dragon's head with a bang. The Black Dragon's neck was bent, and the monster was also sent flying by the huge reaction force. It doesn't even need to breathe. What surprised Caesar was not the opponent's ghostly speed, but its movements that were not sluggish at all. His eyes were locked on the strange dragon not far away. An undead, this thing didn't have the aura of a living creature. No wonder his hunting instinct didn't work, and he couldn't predict where the opponent would attack next. The undead creature's body flashed with light, and a bright blue origin substance flowed out of its limbs and tail. A powerful energy filled its body. The undead creature crouched down, and the ship's hull began to creak. It pounced forward again, and its speed was 3 times faster than before. The sound of breaking through the sound wall and colliding with the body sounded almost at the same time. The rumbling continued, and fragments flew everywhere. Caesar's bio-enhancement armor had not been upgraded, and it was not even as tough as his body. It could not match this level of battle, and it kept peeling off in the violent vibrations. In just 1 minute, the undead had swung its claws hundreds of times. Caesar's head, eyes, mouth, neck, chest, back, joints, all of them were attacked. The bio-enhancement armor peeled off layer by layer, and some of the more vulnerable parts were even injured and bleeding. During this process, the black dragon tried to pull away, but its huge body became an obstacle. The undead followed like a shadow, and it kept tearing at the black dragon's flesh as if it was dismembering. Enough! The black dragon's nostrils blew out 2 puffs of steam. He stood up, raised his thick right leg, and stomped heavily, creating a ring of air with him as the center. I don't want to know what you are. Caesar immediately took a deep breath after roaring. On the giant ship, the fusion particles connected into violent electric currents and then condensed into a pillar of light. Billions of electric currents surrounded it, as if it would explode at any time. The total amount of energy was close to the limit of the material plane. Caesar's movements were slow and difficult, and his eyes were full of ferocity. He did not fly, but the energy had lifted him up. The terrifying breath swept across the giant ship, and the exploding light instantly lit up hundreds of miles. The giant ship suspended in the air was forced to land, and the ground was pressed down 100 meters. The ship turned into a brilliant ball of light. The rock layers were stirred by the shock wave, and the torque acted on the ground, forming a huge whirlpool like water. Layer by layer, all living things were torn and twisted. Even so, the dragon-like undead was not dead. It stood in front of Caesar, and it was unknown whether it was blood or fire gushing out from under its scales. A bloody light shone on its forehead, and several spells floated around it. Why? The undead suddenly lost its composure, and the emotions that were originally sealed gushed out like a volcanic eruption. It did not know what caused its emotional fluctuations, or it could be said that it ignited its anger. It hysterically roared, and flames shot out from its mouth. I've already hidden here. Why won't you let me go? You have consciousness? Caesar wanted to communicate with it, wanting to know what was going on with the sorcerer's stone. You're the owner of this ship, Atuso? Not only am I the master of this ship, but I am also the master of this land. Back then, when Vilost and Aladia split, we were the ones who protected this land from sinking into oblivion. We were the ones who brought life to this land. Thousands of years of investment and legacy have all been destroyed. It lowered its head and cried in horror. This level of power will be exposed to the eyes of the gods. It's over. Everything is gone. What do you mean? Caesar was a little confused. He walked over and grabbed its body. The creature was still full of power, but it did not seem to want to fight. The undead did not struggle. It only looked up at Caesar, and a second layer of pupils appeared in its eyes. I curse you, invader. My race curses you. All Qualdorii curses you. Every day from now on, you will bear our resentment. Countless people in Bot-Or will wave at you. These words were like an oracle. The moment he finished speaking, an indescribable power descended upon Caesar's body. Although it did not have any substantial effect on him, the black dragon was unable to remove it despite its attempts. It stuck to his body like maggots in his bones. What did you do? Chapter 498. What did you do? The puzzled Caesar tightened his claws. The dead object twisted in pain under the huge pressure of the dragon's claws. The agile hedgehogs and bobcats had the ability to play tricks on the titans, but once they were caught by the titans, they had no chance to resist, just like now. The deformed internal organs gushed out of the wound with dark blue pus. The dead object struggled and growled, not responding at all. Very good. Caesar clenched his giant claws and crushed the dead object's body bit by bit. The dead object's body suddenly exploded, and poisonous blood gushed out, causing smoke to rise from the dragon's claws. A half-human hollow sprang out of the exploded body, trying to take advantage of this opportunity to teleport away. Caesar was not surprised that the other party could break through the shackles of the rules of death magic. He sneered and used fire to clean the venom. The dustless land then covered it. When all the dust dissipated, the hollow's naked skin was exposed in front of him. "Any last words?" Caesar asked. The hollow trembled and did not speak. His eyes were filled with deep-seated hatred. "Corgi," Caesar shouted. "Yes." The eye of Gawushi, who had been hiding during the battle, came out of the corner and said in a shrill voice, "I've checked. There are no other living creatures on this starship. So, it is indeed the master of this place." Caesar pursed his lips. "But this guy doesn't seem to be willing to reveal anything. I heard that there are many ways to read memories. It shouldn't be difficult for Gawushi, right?" "Understood." After watching the battle, Corgi seemed to have become much more obedient. The upper eyelids of his eyeballs pressed down, squeezing out a crescent-shaped look. "It'll be done soon." Caesar nodded. The hollow trembled even more violently. The inexplicable smile of this big eyeball made him feel fear. He struggled and shouted, "No, you can't. My race." Before he could finish his words, the fleshy tentacles around Corgi grew crazily and pierced into Hollow's body from all angles. Hollow let out a painful scream, which immediately turned into a low murmur. Soon, even the murmurs disappeared, and there was no sound at all. Caesar looked at it again. This fellow's emotional fluctuations had completely disappeared. Its entire body was clear and transparent, as if it was made of water. Its facial features had also disappeared, and its entire face had become a complete plane. Corgi made noises like he had just eaten something delicious. Consuming the memory will cleanse its consciousness. What is left is a pure consciousness without any gender, thoughts, and memories. In a sense, it is dead. "Then what did you get?" Caesar asked. "It is called misty, descendant of Quel'Dorii." Corgi went straight to the point, then let out a soft sigh. "This race is indeed very powerful. Even the Dragon God and the Dragon Queen could not make them extinct." After the war in the prehistoric era, Quel'Dorii quietly kept a part of the population and hid in a broken continent drifting away from Gondia. All the gods predicted that this continent would sink into the endless sea, but Quel'Dorii quietly propped it up and reproduced after the plane was rebooted. The life on this continent is also the fire seed they brought from Gondia. No wonder this fellow said that he was the master of Vilost at the beginning. Caesar nodded. In order to avoid the pursuit of the dragon god, Quel'Dorii created the death magic stone. Corgi stretched out a tentacle and touched the huge magic stone on the starship. While it restricts the appearance of extraordinary power, it can also blind the gods. The first generation of Quel'Dorii, who migrated here, exhausted the power of the race to create this peerless starship, but the war of extermination caused a gap in the civilization of Quel'Dorii. Later, they could no longer reach the level of their ancestors. In addition, this race's reproduction efficiency was low. In the long history that followed, there were natural disasters, plagues, civil wars, and self-degradation. In this generation, misty was the only one left in Quel'Dorii. Corgi sighed. "I think even if you did not come, in a few hundred years, this race would have completely disappeared from the world. How pitiful." Caesar commented. "I guess their ancestors put in a lot of effort to send them here, hoping that the remaining fire seed could burn again and complete the revenge against the dragon god and the dragon queen. Who would have thought that, in the end, they still could not change the outcome of extinction?" "It's not like there's no progress," Corgi said. "The divine power you fought against before was developed by Quel'Dorii after seeing the dragon god and the dragon queen. It imitated the ancestor god Io so vividly. Didn't it deceive you too? It's controlled by the central system of the starship. After charging, it can be used to intimidate all creatures below the level of a true god. We can use this starship." Caesar's eyes lit up. "Yes," Corgi said, "but because of its age, many things in this starship, including the weapon system, the intelligent control system, and the shuttle system, are damaged and not in an operating state. Otherwise, do you think you can easily break in?" This is the ultimate creation of the Quell Dorii civilization. I know it can be repaired. Corgi looked at the big black dragon with a headache. Before he could speak, he already knew what this guy wanted to say. But it will be difficult. It will take hundreds of years. The big eyeball floated up and pulled the dull body of pure consciousness. It will take a lot of effort for me to seize control of the starship, and this is under the condition of eating Monsieur Finney. Otherwise, we won't have a chance at all. The starship's lock stealing system is from a high-tech civilization. If it doesn't work, it will self-destruct. Caesar stared at it. Okay, I understand. Corgi held his cheek with his tentacles and said, "You provide the materials, and I can spend time and energy to fix it. But I have a request. After the repair, this starship will be under my control. I will live in it. You can't send your family to interfere with me." Okay, Caesar smiled. "From now on, this ship is yours. You belong to me. One last question." Caesar became serious. "What's the curse that guy said before he died?" "Curse." Corgi's expression changed. He floated around Caesar and clicked his tongue. TSK, TSK, as the last remaining life of the race. Although Monsieur Finty is useless, it carries the last hope of the entire race. It hates you, so all of Quell Dorii hates you. This is troublesome. Kneel down and beg me. Only I, who devoured its memory, know the solution. It seemed that the beating was not enough. Caesar grabbed the eyeball's tentacles and pulled it over. He pinched and flattened it, swung it twice, and threw it on the metal floor of the starship. He stepped on it, and the deformed eyeball flesh overflowed from his feet. Okay, I'll tell you." Its buzzing voice came from below. "Actually, for a life of your level, the curse won't have much effect. At most, you won't have good luck in the future. The stronger you get, the weaker the curse will be." Chapter 499. The sunset in the green forest had always been beautiful. It was gentler than any sunlight in the northern lands. Looking down from the watchtower of the dragon's lair, the cheese-colored sunset spread across the sky, enveloping the entire forest in it. With the destruction of the last descendants of Quell Dorii, everything in Vilost was settled. There was no longer any local power that could resist Blackwing's rule. The next day after Caesar returned from the starship, Golden City announced their surrender to Blackwing. After accepting the worship of Golden City, Caesar met with Garen in the spacious meeting hall of the starship. There was nothing much to say. After a short chat, he handed over the matters of Vilost to him and rushed back to Iradia. The Green Forest had always been Caesar's logistics base. The Dragon's Nest project, which was the most important thing to supplement the Empire's military force, was carried out here. However, 2 years ago, due to the pressure of the Dragon God and the lack of resources, Emperor Black Dragon stopped the project. All personnel were withdrawn from the Green Forest and assigned to other positions. Now, the former secret base had become Caesar's backyard, allowing this lazy guy to escape from the complicated affairs of the Empire. The Black Dragon kept his fangs and claws, lying on the top of the watchtower, staring blankly at the forest in the distance. After some time, Caesar realized that this could not go on, so he slowly climbed down the watchtower, making as little noise as possible, and crawled into the dragon's nest with his neck arched. "Still no movement?" he asked. "Ugh." Luna shook her head, then stared at the egg in front of her, her little face bitter. The dragon egg already had signs of life and emotional fluctuations. A week ago, it began to signal to Luna that she was about to be born. Therefore, Caesar decided to bring the dragon egg to the dragon's nest, wanting to witness the birth of his daughter with his own eyes. However, a week had passed, and the newborn still did not break out of the shell. The energy gathered on the surface of the eggshell gradually weakened, and the colorful patterns disappeared, settling into a deep black. Caesar became anxious. Although he was a dragon with a different body, he was familiar with the basic knowledge of dragons. He knew very well that the pure-blooded dragon's ability to reproduce was not strong. This was because whether it was the Penachet dragons or the metallic dragons, almost half of the newborns would die early because they could not survive the dragon's inheritance. He came because of this, so he remembered it clearly. The dragon egg in front of him was very similar to that situation. The signal from the dragon egg became more and more impatient. It seemed to be asking for help, but it also seemed to be calling for help. However, this new life could only transmit simple emotional fluctuations to the outside world. It could not communicate with the outside world like a hatchling, so Caesar could not understand what it really wanted to convey. Caesar, Luna looked at the black dragon anxiously. Although the little guy was usually unreliable, as a mother, she still did her homework in this area very carefully. She knew what this situation of the dragon egg might mean. She almost could not help but cry. Caesar, she came up with a stupid idea. How about we chisel the eggshell? The baby dragon can't come out. The emotion from the dragon egg turned into panic. No. Caesar shook his head and said to Luna, "Little Odin may have encountered some small problems, but if we forcefully destroy the egg, she will die immediately. Then what should we do?" Luna's two eyebrows wrinkled together. Regardless of whether my dragon's inheritance exists or not, if it exists and she can't bear it, what she should do is to find a way to survive and not ask for help from us, because we can't help her. Caesar pondered, since little Odin is asking for help from us, then at least in her eyes, we can help her. Black Dragon thought for a moment, opened his mouth, and tried to spit out a gentle stream of flames, keeping the temperature of the egg's surface above 70 degrees. The dragon egg sent out a happy emotion, but it turned into anxiety in an instant. Not this method. Black Dragon received his daughter's feedback, raised his but put his neck flat on the ground, and began to explore step by step according to this pattern. Flame, frost, thunder, poisonous breath, and acid. Caesar tried all the attributes of the pentashade dragon energy, instilling it into the deep surface of the egg. The little guy in the dragon egg did not give any good feedback. Then he tried his own unique fusion energy, but still did not have any effect. In the end, Black Dragon had no choice but to release radiation on the dragon egg like how he had corrupted the other dragons. An unexpected result appeared. Before the dragon egg could give any feedback, Caesar realized that the radiation he had just released had been absorbed by the little life without sparing any effort. It felt like a drop of water in a puddle. Soon, the dragon egg sent out a desire. "It's fine." Caesar calmed down and comforted Luna. Perhaps because the incubation period was too long, the nutrition that the dragon egg carried when it was born has been exhausted, and it is not enough to support her breaking out of the shell. We just need to supplement it with some nutrition. Radiation? Luna muttered this new term Caesar told her, opening her eyes wide and staring curiously at the dragon egg. "Our daughter eats radiation?" "It's not impossible." Caesar smiled, using his psionic energy to surround Luna with a protective layer to prevent the excessive radiation from leaving any hidden dangers to her. He then removed the layers of shackles, releasing the powerful radiation he had been actively suppressing all this time. Caesar's radiation was not as simple as the radiation that was commonly understood on Earth in his previous life. It was a product of the Black Dream's distortion. This thing did not have any lethality and was more like a permanent buff in the game. It could cause the infected creatures to distort and mutate, and in the process, put their lives in danger. In the Dragon Nest project, 40% of the recipients died from the radiation and were now buried under this large garden. A huge amount of radiation erupted in an instant, and the dragon egg blossomed with a dark red light, tirelessly absorbing the terrifying rays from Caesar's body. As it absorbed more and more, its light became brighter and brighter, like a small sun shining brightly in the room. Knock, knock. Caesar heard a strange sound coming from the dragon egg. The little guy in the eggshell was working hard, trying to break the shell for the first time. Soon, under Luna's overjoyed gaze, a crack appeared on the eggshell. Not long after, with a splash, a baby dragon flowed out of the egg along with a sticky liquid. Perhaps it should be called a dragon, right? Its appearance was different from any known true dragon in Eladia. In fact, it was different from all the other true dragons that had appeared before. This little creature's body was only about 20 centimeters long, smaller than any newly born true dragon. However, its tail was very long, and the end of its tail was curled into a circle. Instead of horns on its head, there were two colorful tentacles that looked like ribbons. Its head was somewhat similar to the newborn black dragon. Its head was large, but the curve of its snout was rather delicate, and the horns on its nose were small and short. It did not have the ferocity of a carnivorous creature at all. Its wings were pale green, with the edges wrapped in black. Because of the sticky liquid, they did not protrude, but hung on the sides of its body. Odin Tangerine, this is my true name. The newborn dragon's clear voice shouted twice, once in Draconic and once in fairy language. After shouting, the little dragon took a deep breath of the fresh air from the material plane. It did not have the time to care about its parents, and turned to quickly eat its own eggshell. When its stomach felt full, the drake finally had the time to think about other things. It looked at its own body and seemed dissatisfied. Curling its lips, it suddenly changed into another form, a forest fairy girl about 5 or 6 years old. Chapter 500. There was no surge of magic. This was not a transformation spell, but a natural talent of the little guy. As a rare species born from the union of a giant dragon and a fairy, Odin was born with two different appearances. Unlike the rule that a giant dragon's power level would be suppressed after transforming, this situation would not appear on Odin's body. At this moment, my heart is a little cold. This was the first thought that came to Caesar's mind. As his own child, Odin did not inherit much of the black dragon's appearance. That beautiful color and slender body lines were clearly more similar to the characteristics of a fairy. However, what comforted him was that the energy waves coming from the little dragon whelp clearly belonged to Caesar. Although it was much milder than the violent aura of the black dragon's body, and its strength was like starlight compared to the sun when compared to its father's body, this wave was enough to prove that it inherited the Black Emperor's bloodline. It was unknown how strong this bloodline was, but judging from the power level of the little dragon whelp, although it was not as exaggerated as being born as a legendary, it could still easily beat the young red dragon and gold dragon. In terms of talent, little Odin was born with magic resistance and magic perception, as well as a series of gift packs including breath, alertness, insight, intimidation, and so on. If her abilities were integrated into an elegy card, it would definitely be the template of a young, extraordinary creature. Yaya. Little Odin flapped its colorful wings and ran to Luna's side with a whoosh. When it leaped behind Luna, half of its little head poked out to quietly size up the black dragon. It was no wonder. Compared to the black dragon, the newborn dragon whelp was naturally closer to Luna. After all, the time they spent together was worlds apart. Since the dragon egg was born, Luna had never let go, hugging her egg almost every day as she waited for it to hatch. On the other hand, Caesar seemed to pay less attention to the dragon egg. More coincidentally, Odin had the ability to perceive the outside world before it hatched. When Caesar came to its side, the little dragon whelp easily detected the terrifying and powerful aura from its father's body. Although the bloodline bond would reduce the fear to the greatest extent, the innate reverence was still deeply imprinted in the little dragon whelp's consciousness. However, Odin was still very clear that the person in front of it was its father. Therefore, although it was hiding behind Luna and peeking, it could not help but release its aura of intimacy towards the black dragon. "Oh, little Odin, don't be afraid." Luna hugged the sprite that was 2 sizes smaller than her and said to Caesar, "Big stupid dragon, aren't you happy that the baby is born? Why do you have such a long face?" "When did I?" Caesar was confused. He did not understand why Luna suddenly became so fierce. Was it his fault that she looked fierce? Oh, at this moment, a voice came from outside the room. "Excuse me, can I come in and take a look? Corgi, has your starship been repaired?" Caesar heard the voice of the big eyeball. He did not know when this guy came to the dragon's nest with him. He waved his hand to let it in. "Don't tell me you have something to trouble me with. I will be very unhappy." "No, no. I already said that repairing it will be a long work." Corgi rubbed its tentacles and floated in. For some reason, this guy deliberately dressed up, changing the shape of its body and changing its overall color. It did not look like its previous bloody and terrifying appearance. From Caesar's point of view, it looked a bit like a cute cartoon character. "I'm just curious to see what your descendant looks like." There was no doubt that Corgi was the most courteous this time. Usually, this guy was either arrogant and condescending for no reason, or arrogant and mocking everything. In any case, he was asking for a beating. But this time, his big eyes finally straightened out. It seemed that for these extraordinary creatures who had lived for an unknown period of time, their curiosity towards new things was the driving force behind their actions. I just felt the resonance of the elements. It seems that something incredible has appeared. It's right here. Corgi continued to rub its tentacles. Then he saw the little fairy, Odin, who was in Luna's arms with a harmless look on his face. "You gave birth to a sprite?" Corgi could not help but blurt out. However, it immediately reacted and realized that although this little guy looked like a magical creature on the outside, it was a genuine dragon. The eye of Gauche would not mistake the aura of a dragon. Odin stared at the big eyeball curiously. It seemed that it wanted to reach out and grab Corgi's tentacles, but Luna held it firmly in her arms and stopped it. A species born from a union of a dragon and a sprite. "In my memory, it's not that it has never existed," Corgi said, "but I haven't seen a sprite dragon that can resonate with the elements. It's probably because there's no monster like you." "Is that a compliment?" Caesar glared at it. "Ahem." At this moment, little Odin suddenly coughed, attracting everyone's attention. Luna wanted to pat her on the back, but in the next moment, Odin broke free from his mother's arms and suddenly transformed into its previous dragon form. She took a deep breath as if she could not breathe. Her tail straightened, and she sneezed. A small piece of dark sand-like substance gushed out of the baby dragon's mouth and spread to the fan-shaped area in front of her with a whoosh. Corgi's eyes lit up immediately. It casually outlined a magic puppet with its tentacles and threw it into the area covered by the breath. Then, in front of everyone's eyes, the magic puppet was eroded and melted at a speed visible to the naked eye, disappearing without a trace. Slurp. After a breath, Odin made a snorting sound, shook its head, felt for a while, and returned to its sprite form. TSK Tisk. Corgi was amazed. A breath that can produce an annihilation effect. Caesar frowned. Was this antimatter energy? He didn't even have it himself. He had only just obtained a basic body module. What a powerful little girl. Corgi thought for a moment and said to Luna, "Honorable Madam, no matter what, I should send a gift to celebrate the birth of the great empire's eldest princess." The big eyeball stretched out its tentacles and tapped gently in space. It opened a dimensional zone and took out a thick and shiny magic book. This is the Source C Magic Scroll. Reading it will allow you to grasp the deepest spells of the material plane. I hope the little princess will be able to use it in the future. Why did you suddenly pick it up? Caesar glanced at it. Perhaps I discovered an incredible opportunity. Corgi smiled. With you, I might be able to succeed in the future. Therefore, I decided to contribute and invest in advance. In that case, Caesar understood what it meant. After some consideration, he said, "All right, if there's a chance in the future. But this book alone isn't enough. You have to teach my daughter personally." Although the power of the great black dragon was very strong, in terms of vision and knowledge, it was still not comparable to those real extraordinary creatures, not to mention the Eye of Gauche, which had all the memories of the gods. So compared to Sui Xiong, Corgi might be more outstanding as a teacher. Then, should the starship be repaired, I don't care. Due to the birth of the eldest princess, the Empire held a week-long celebration. The Black Dragon's empire quieted down. All external military operations were stopped, and many state employees were allowed to rest. Apart from the Kamai Desert in the east, where excavators, goblins, and some battle lizardmen were reclaiming canals, recruiting farmers, and distributing land. The country's front lines facing Iradia were quiet. Of course, the poor on the west coast was still arresting people. This place was one of the most prosperous and chaotic areas in the empire. Countless pirates, thieves, killers, and cultists gathered here before being sent to the gallows outside the port for violating the empire's laws. Chapter 501. Compared to Caesar's tragic childhood, Odin, who was born in the Blackwing Empire with a high status, could be said to be quite happy. In the early stages of her growth, the little one could eat food that was several times her weight every day, so her body grew rapidly. Although her fairy form was still a little girl of 3 or 4 years old, her dragon form was already close to the size of a pony. She also showed signs of some magical talent. However, compared to these, what little Odin needed to learn now was how to control her unstable breath. Things were gradually getting on track, and Caesar also had time to deal with his own matters, which was to reforge the BioBoost armor. After integrating Vilost, the Transsea transport ships from the west transported ships of dead iron to Iradia. In the hinterland of the Northern Empire, the molten core provided by Asliers was already well preserved. The Wildhammer dwarves worked day and night, hollowing out an entire mountain to build a furnace to accommodate the Black Emperor. Coincidentally, Caesar realized that a new round of hibernation was coming, so he decided to do these two things together. So he called Hogg and asked the various departments of the Empire to start coordinating and preparing. The northern machine began to rumble as it began to operate. The area within 100 miles of the hollowed-out Mount Carmel immediately became a forbidden zone. Countless radiation dragons, the Blackwing clan, and the Black Shirts were deployed to become garrisons in this area. There were 3 routes that were continuously transporting supplies to this place. They came from the Imperial Court, the port of the West Coast, and the Blackrock City. When Caesar landed in this mountain range, everything was ready. Below, countless Wildhammer dwarves were working hard to move all kinds of casting materials under the scorching sun. Inside the mountain, which was now only an empty shell, countless iron chains crisscrossed, hanging all kinds of huge hammers, rams, and plates. These iron chains were engraved with inscriptions, outlining a huge pattern. Only by looking down from the top could one see the huge pattern completely. Even though the unbearable heat from the boiling lava beneath the earth made the dwarves sweat profusely, even with the support of their spells, their chests glowing red from the heat. Still, they worked under the orders of their tribe leader with a clear division of labor and an orderly manner. The dwarves see it as an honor to complete a piece of work independently. Ada's Xiongxin came to Caesar's side and said to him, "But the burning stars technique won't work. This is a forging method that we made for the Titans in prehistoric times. It requires the cooperation of a tribe's population. In fact, a part of the ancient forging technique has been lost and forgotten. We spent a lot of time trying to complete it." Caesar's expression changed slightly. "It's best not to make any mistakes." "It won't." Ada shook his head. "This is made by my clan for the Black Emperor, and the effect will only be better than before. Of course, I've already mentioned the pain." "I understand," Caesar said, after a moment of silence. "Can we begin?" "After you." Ada nodded. Caesar returned to his huge form and stepped into the boiling lava. His body sank a little, and black smoke rose from the lava pool. Moradin above. Ada closed his eyes and chanted the name of the dwarf god. "You have buried spirit and fire in our bodies, like a coal mine burning deep underground. The red lava is the blood of the dwarves, and the immortal copper and iron are our bones. We follow your will and move forward, cutting through thorns and thorns fearlessly." He chanted in a language that dragons could not understand, and his voice was sometimes high and sometimes low, reminding people of dwarves with big bellies drinking and making noise around a casting table. On the casting table, legendary works were burning, condensing all the knowledge passed down by the dwarves since ancient times. Attas controlled the huge magic array, controlling the magma lava to climb onto Caesar's body, reducing the black dragon's body's resistance to the outside world as much as possible. Caesar was also trying his best to restrain his power to avoid any accidents. When the lava gradually merged into Caesar's body, the Wildhammer dwarves came to the black dragon's side under the command of their king. They took out a black iron chisel and pried open the black dragon's armor bit by bit from the edge. However, even if the armor was already covered in lava, it still took the dwarves a lot of effort to peel it off. The iron chisel and the armor collided, sparks flew everywhere, and at the same time, beams of red light were drawn out. It hurts. This was the only thing Caesar felt. The dwarves were indeed very skilled in forging. They were peeling off the armor from his body, and the pain they had to endure was unimaginable. The armor had already become a part of Caesar's body, connecting his flesh, bones, and nerves. The dwarves' operation was like performing a surgery on the black dragon. Tons of blood burst out of the black dragon's body and flowed into the raging lava pool. The entire cave began to burn, and a blazing wind swept out from the center of the magic array. Steam rose in spirals, and the swaying iron chains made a sound as if they were about to burst. On the other side, the Wildhammer dwarves were holding red-hot iron hammers and hammering the armor that their companions had stripped off from the black dragon's body. They added the dead iron into the armor to recast it. Their hammers were burning, and with every strike, dark red flames splashed in all directions. Their hair and beard were ignited and extinguished in the flames, and their clothes and skin became dry and cracked. However, they only remembered to hammer with all their might, regardless of everything. Seeing this, the black dragon was relieved. The dwarves' dedication was well known throughout the astral plane. They were indeed doing their best to recast the armor for him. Caesar, who could not bear the pain, could only use psionic power to isolate his five senses. This made him feel much better. He raised his huge head slightly and asked, "I heard from Hogg that you need a lot of magic stones. How long will it take?" "At least 2 months. King Brute hammer nodded. "This is a massive project. My clansmen also need to rest during this process to replenish their energy and stamina. In order to achieve the highest efficiency, I've already divided them into 3 groups. They're working day and night. Thank you for your hard work," Caesar said sincerely. His body sank a little into the magma. "I'll sleep for a while." After sealing his 5 senses, the black dragon could enter a state of sleep even in this situation. He was not worried about any accidents. The worst result would be the failure of the armor forging. As for himself, there would not be any problems. The dwarves did not have the ability to hurt him. In the smoke and the clanging of hammers, the black dragon really did fall asleep and began to grow in his sleep. It couldn't be helped. Dragons were creatures like this. How strong they could become in the end depended entirely on whether they slept enough and whether they could grow smoothly every time they slept. When they were awake, it was very difficult for Caesar to complete the advancement of his strength. It was worth mentioning that the strengthening of this guy's body could no longer be carried out by eating, digesting, and cell proliferation. His body had already broken through the limit of a dragon in the material plane. If he wanted to continue growing, he could only rely on pure energy. Fusion energy promoted cell proliferation. When the cells had enough energy, they would self-replicate, divide, and at the same time mutate. After entering a deep sleep, Caesar began to evolve. More energy nodes appeared in his body. These energy nodes appeared in special spots on the black dragon's meridians. There were as many as hundreds of them. On a more microscopic level, each of these energy nodes was a small fusion reactor. They were centered on the furnace in his heart, communicating and linking together to provide more perfect and detailed energy for the black dragon. Now the black dragon did not need to breathe to survive. This was the foundation of traveling in the astral plane. His heart was a powerful fusion reactor. This terrible central system delivered energy to all the organs in his body, and the fusion nodes maintained his vigorous physical vitality. Most importantly, this guy's brain had begun to become different. When his psionic power reached a certain level, his brain gradually showed signs of crystallization. If someone used their X-ray vision to look at the black dragon's brain, it would be like there was a huge, bright crystal inside. All of this proves that the black dragon is walking further and further away from the path of material life, and the end of this path is still unknown to us at the moment. Chapter 502. The frequent arrivals of large ships from the West Coast, the heavily guarded transportation routes in the Blackstone City, the wild-hammer dwarves cutting off communication with the outside world, and the disappearance of the Black Dragon Emperor. The recent movements of the Northern Empire, coupled with the rumors, groundless clues, and hearsay, made many people unable to sit still. They tried to break the law and enter Mount Carmel, which was heavily guarded by the Blackwing Empire. There were many of them, and their composition was rather complicated. Most of them were adventurers who had lost their minds. Some of them were spies from other countries, assassins who were waiting for an opportunity to seek revenge, and ambitious people who wanted to overthrow the Black Dragon's rule. Of course, there were also believers of the gods. They died very quickly. The first batch of people who tried to enter Mount Carmel were killed before they could see what was inside. The professional skills of the adventurers were useless in front of the well-trained orc soldiers. The moment they stepped into the Forbidden Zone, their throats were cut, and their bodies were separated from their bodies. They breathed their last. Intruder, Luga. The orc soldiers who appeared in front of them were armed with long-handled axes, clad in armor, and wearing bull-horned helmets. These orcs were dressed neatly, and each of them was as tall as 2 men. They were all muscular, and most importantly, these orcs had brown skin. The cruel way the Empire dealt with the intruders made the adventurers stand still in fear. The ferocious orc army became the outermost perimeter of Mount Carmel. There were many orcs, and the defense was tight. This kind of war-level surveillance was daunting, and it also aroused the curiosity of the adventurers. However, after learning from the mistakes of their predecessors, they decided to give up on the idea of entering Mount Carmel. Instead, they turned to other ways to spy on Mount Carmel. For example, magic. Facts prove that this idea was undoubtedly correct. Those adventurers who knew how to use magic saw the scenery that others did not see. However, they soon met with trouble because there were even more ferocious enemies waiting for them in the inner layer of Mount Carmel. Radiation dragons. Most of these radiation dragons used to be draconic beasts that did not know magic, defective products that failed to grow. Even the Black Emperor could not change that fact. But after the mutation of radiation, these ferocious fellows had an unusually sharp perception of magic. They could even follow the path of magic to drag out the culprit behind the scenes and devour them. The blood-stained cordons blocked almost everyone's prying eyes, but there seemed to be an exception to everything. An uninvited guest successfully passed through the layers of barriers and entered the true core of Mount Carmel, the resting place of the Black Dragon Emperor, Aglarin Lamorahan. In reality, the Lich had left the Ghost Swamp a long time ago. His curiosity towards mutated dragons drove him to the Northern World as his first stop. He spent some money to buy a manor in the Northern Kingdom. Without anyone knowing, he lived under the evil Dragon Emperor's watchful eyes for a while. 2 days ago, Aglarin's servant told him some interesting information, so he decided to come and take a look. Aglarin entered Mount Carmel from the main road. He walked casually like a traveler. The orcs, hounds, and radiation dragons he encountered along the way ignored him. The Lich passed through the warning lines one after another easily. A cold wind blew past. Nero, who was lying at the entrance of the furnace, suddenly stood up. He raised his head and sniffed. Then he let out 2 unclear murmurs and lay back on the ground, squinting his eyes and wagging his tail. Aglarin had already entered the furnace. The Lich stared at Nero's mane for a while, then turned to look at the furnace. This minion is quite powerful. I wonder where he got it from. In the next moment, the Lich showed a rare emotional fluctuation. The soul fire in his eye sockets flickered. An absurdly large beast was buried in the magma. Many of its scales had fallen off, revealing parts of its flesh that were soaked in the magma. It seemed to be in a deep sleep. Its ferocious head was lying flat on the ground, and the fangs that protruded from its lower jaw were shining with a black light. This energy is molten core. Aglarin stared at the surroundings. What is this guy doing? The molten core in the large pool of lava had already turned into liquid and flowed into the black dragon's body through the wound where the scales had been peeled off. The next moment, there was a reverberating sound as the ram in the sky smashed into the black dragon's body, embedding new scales into its body. On the workbenches on both sides, countless dwarves were craning their necks and hammering the black dragon's body with their hammers, creating clanking sounds. The molten core that had fused into the black dragon's body had combined with the dead iron and transformed into a brand new substance. This monster is making a new shell for itself? Aglarin speculated. When he first met the black dragon, he saw that there was something wrong with the dragon's body. Its body and the strange scales on the surface had an irreconcilable rejection reaction. However, Aglarin did not expect that the monster's way of dealing with it was to forcefully peel off the original shell and create a new armor for itself. What a bold choice, the Lich praised. The Lich exclaimed in admiration. He had never heard of a dragon doing such a cruel thing to him. Sure enough, the logic and thinking style of a mutated dragon was completely different from that of a true dragon. These fellows from another world were all tough characters to deal with. However, most of the dragons that exposed their hibernation did not have a good ending, especially in front of a Lich. It should be very weak now, right? Aglarin thought. The Black Emperor, who could fight against the gods in the main material world, would look like if it was turned into an undead creature. Should I try it? Just as the thought came to his mind, before he could put it into action, the sleeping beast suddenly let out a long whistle from its nostrils. It was the sound of the black dragon breathing out a high-speed airstream from its nostrils, and the sharp whistle echoed in the chamber. Then the whole mountain furnace was filled with the sound of deep breathing. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. This guy's gonna wake up? What's going on? A dragon's hibernation cycle is clearly measured in years. Aglarin was shocked. On the surface of the black dragon's body, the newly embedded dark scales began to glow, and the exposed parts without scales also flowed with luster. The dwarves shouted at each other and retreated. The whole mountain furnace was filled with strong life energy. Caesar Tangerine had woken up. The black dragon monarch opened his spiderweb-like dark golden vertical eyes and raised his head from the lava. He found me? Aglarin stared at the black dragon's huge eyes and realized that he was looking at him. It's you, Lich. Overlapping voices came from the dragon's throat. You just had malice towards me, didn't you? I can feel it. You have disturbed my slumber. Chapter 503. This guy. If the Lich had a physical body, Aglarin's forehead would have been covered in cold sweat. 4 undead creatures that walked in the shadows. Stealth and concealment were their forte. Liches, who were good at playing with souls and magic, were the best among them. After entering Mount Carmel, Aglarin maintained the highest level of vigilance. He was sure that he did not reveal any traces or aura. Malice. Could such a thing really be sensed? Caesar gave Aglarin the answer. The huge dragon slowly raised his body. Boiling lava flowed down his rough black scales like dark red blood. He stared at where Aglarin was hiding and said, "Let me think. Such malice. You want to turn me into an undead dragon, right?" The Lich unconsciously took a few steps back. He was not afraid of the black dragon, but he did not have the confidence to win. More importantly, they were in the opponent's territory. Caesar Tangerine had countless minions that he could order around. It was not wise to fight the black dragon here. What? Do you want to leave? Overlapping voices rumbled above his head. Just as Caesar was halfway through his sentence, Aglarin made a prompt decision. He instantly cast a teleportation spell and prepare to leave this dangerous place. For an extraordinary creature like him, low-level emotions such as humiliation and face did not exist. Actual gains and losses were what the Lich really cared about. Facing the Black Emperor in the north, running away without a fight did not bring any psychological burden to Aglarin. In his opinion, it was the wisest choice. It's not good to be disturbed in one's sleep, especially for a dragon. You want to leave without leaving something behind? The Black Dragon mumbled. Then his eyes became sharp, and he whispered silently, "Order, Emperor." In the direction he was looking, the space shattered like a mirror, revealing the primordial chaos mixed with light and darkness. At the same time, countless space nodes connected to this place were all broken at the same time. The Lich, who was in the middle of the teleportation spell, was cut off. In order not to fall into the chaos, he had to go back the way he came. Caesar pulled him back. Aglarin was forced to go back to the starting point. He did not show any signs of panic. He just sighed softly and said the power of a god. At their level, even without any explanation, they could quickly understand the principles and effects of the spells and abilities cast by the opponent. However, understanding was one thing, and whether or not they could do it was another. Aglarin knew very well that if the Black Dragon used a teleportation spell to escape, he could only follow closely behind. He could not do something like cutting off the opponent's path and forcing him back. However, this did not prove that the opponent was definitely stronger than him. Aglarin looked around with a doubtful expression. Here, Caesar ignored him. He tilted his head slightly and asked Prince Athos, who was standing on the tower, "Is it done?" "There's basically no problem," the Wildhammer dwarf said, "but this is actually the first time we've made this kind of armor. If we don't know the specific effects, it's best if you take some time to get used to it." "I'll get used to it now," Caesar snorted. He lifted his claw out of the lava pool and smashed it on the ground with a dull thud. "Go rest. Take your people and leave." Although he said that, the Black Dragon did not seem to give the dwarves much time to retreat. Less than 10 seconds after he finished speaking, the guy had already started attacking the Lich. Dancing flames swept across the land. The dwarves had no time to clean up. They could only bend their backs and quickly escape through the ropeway. "Caesar Tangerine," Aglarin suddenly shouted. Aglarin suddenly said loudly, his voice echoing in the mountain furnace, "There is no hatred or conflict between us. Are you going to fight me?" No, don't misunderstand. I don't want to fight you." The giant dragon above his head suddenly paused. With a serious expression, it said, "Just as compensation for being disturbed from hibernation, I would like to ask for your help. Help me test the effects of my new armor. That's not too much, is it? Of course, if you accidentally get killed, then I'll be sorry." "Stupid pig." Aglarin cursed in his heart. He stretched out his materialized, bony hand and pulled out a scepter from the magic space. He retorted, "There is only one dragon emperor in Eladia. If you die, I'm afraid this world will lose a lot of fun." Caesar's eyes moved slightly. He stared at the scepter in the Lich's hand. It was not an ordinary magic item. It was a dragon-slaying weapon. The legendary dragon-slaying power did exist. It came from a god named Marduk. If one prayed to this god, there would be a chance to exchange for a special weapon blessed by the god's grace. The blood and soul of a dragon killed with this weapon would be entangled in the weapon. The dragon would howl furiously and let its power be absorbed by the weapon. Every time a dragon was killed, the weapon's unique damage to the dragon would multiply. In fact, the dragon hunters that Caesar faced back then had similar weapons. However, due to the huge difference in strength between the two sides, the dragon hunters were annihilated by the Black Dragon's breath before they could even get close to Caesar. The dragon hunting weapons that Caesar had meticulously prepared were also useless. How nostalgic. Aglarin rubbed the scepter with his bony fingers and whispered, "It's been a long time since I took out this thing. The last time I used it, I was still immortal. At that time, I was facing an old green dragon. What was its name again? Oh, Standro Bloodfall, the master of Disaster Castle. It ruled over 2 draconian clans, 3 canine lizardmen tribes, and many other dragon descendants. It had been suppressing 21 villages and 4 cities for a long time. A legendary ancient dragon. That guy was really fierce. Unfortunately, she died soon, along with her descendants. The Lich's words were a little long, but he did not expect Caesar to listen to him patiently. This strange reaction stunned Aglarin. The black dragon was still looking at him. When the Lich subconsciously stopped talking, the black dragon said sincerely, "Say more. After all, after you die, no one will remember these stories. I'll keep them for you." Even if he knows this is a dragon-slaying weapon, this guy still wants to fight? Can't he see that there are 13 dragon souls lingering on it? Aglarin clenched his teeth and thought, "Mad dragon." He was right. Caesar was indeed a little mad. The desire to conquer and destroy in the marrow of a dragon was constantly urging him to fight. It had been a long time since he had fought to his heart's content. The last time he had a good time was when he fought the flame demon king Asliers. Now that they were allies, Caesar could not go looking for Asliers every day. Therefore, disturbing his sleep and testing his armor were all excuses. Caesar only wanted to give this damn, pretentious lich a good beating. How effective would a dragon-slaying weapon blessed by Marduk's divine grace have against the strongest dragon in the prime material plane, Black Dragon Caesar Tangerine? Aglarin raised his hand and decided to give it a try. Chapter 504. The moment Aglarin raised his hand, the scepter burst into a blazing brilliance. This was a divine weapon blessed by Marduk, the main god with great divine power. When it lit up, Caesar immediately felt his blood begin to burn. Dragon's Wrath. One of the special effects of the dragon-slaying weapon was that it could make all dragons with dragon blood, including the legendary dragons, go into a state of rage and attack all living things around them. In Iradia's history, there were cases of giant dragons trampling and killing their kin under the influence of the dragon-slaying weapon. Roar! The black dragon roared in a low voice, showing unusual calmness. It spread its metal-like wings and swung its tail away from the hot magma. It moved its 4 limbs and approached the Lich. Energy flowed around its body in an orderly manner. It doesn't work? Aglarin looked at the scepter and was a little confused. Without a doubt, the Black Dragon Caesar Tangerine was indeed different from ordinary dragons and even different from ordinary creatures. In the depths of this guy's head, his brain had completely crystallized into something like a divine fire, which contained the Black Dragon's spiritual will and vast spiritual power. The mechanism of the dragon's wrath made it ineffective on Caesar. Order, royal power, the dragon language came from above. All below the king must kneel. An invisible pressure immediately appeared on Aglarin's body, and he had to land on the ground. Dense cracks quickly appeared on his fragile skull, and the leg bones covered in the black robe couldn't bear the burden and broke inch by inch. Gravity control. Aglarin put down the scepter and looked at his broken finger bones. He opened his toothless mouth and said, "You seem to have used this trick in the wrong place." When he held the scepter again, the flesh and bones of his body had faded away, and Aglarin showed his original form made of pure spirits. This was also the first time his aura skyrocketed. The turbulent negative energy flooded Mount Carmel, and even the sky outside darkened. "It's been a long time since I've fought." Aglarin confronted the black dragon with his huge and horrifying body. His head was like a human skeleton and became as big as Caesar. Because of the negative energy around him, he looked even bigger than the black dragon. The Lich extended an arm made of energy out of thin air and stuffed the scepter into its body. Then, it let out a high-pitched shriek at the black dragon. Caesar responded with a growl, and the 2 supernatural creatures of the prime material world began to wrestle. While the Black Emperor was gradually enraged and fighting with his opponent, in the Blackwing Palace thousands of miles away, Odin was sneaking out of his own palace. She had disguised herself. The little girl was only a few months old, but she had already grasped the true art of shape-shifting. Now, she could transform into anything within her ability, a human girl of about 11 or 12 years old. The reason she wanted to shapeshift was that if she stayed in her original form, she would be too big of a target. Both her fairy form and human form were known to the guards of the palace. These guys were very annoying. No matter what she did, they would immediately report it. There was no privacy to speak of. Odin ran out of the palace through several twists and turns, sneaking out of the palace through the back door. Then, she began to speed up, crossing half of the capital as quickly as possible. Along the way, she looked back vigilantly and observed the surroundings. After half an hour of trekking, she finally reached her destination. She excitedly jumped onto the fence. This was Father's ranch. Gulp. Odin sniffed, then swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Inside the fence, a herd of Bysmy horned cattle was leisurely swinging their tails and bathing in the sun. These cattle that were specially provided for the Black Dragon Emperor were different from the wild Bysmy horned cattle. They were all cattle that had been castrated since young and were carefully fed with high-quality pasture. They were also often cared for and massaged by their keepers until they were 6 to 9 years old. When their meat was at its most delicious, they would then be sent to the palace to be slaughtered and served to the Black Emperor's table. Odin used her black eyes to stare at the cattle that were either walking or lying in the fence. Her mother, Luna, did not allow her to eat too much meat, nor did she allow her to hunt for living creatures. Instead, she suggested that she eat flower dew that was rich in essence. However, she was a dragon. Despite her appearance, she was still a real dragon. How could a dragon not eat meat? Ever since her father had let her have a taste of it last time, Odin couldn't forget the taste. However, even though they had been castrated, the Bysmy horned cattle were still one of the most ferocious cattle in Iradia. It must be known that in the wild, the beastmen of the Stone Crow clan would encounter trouble and danger when hunting them. Now, the leader of the cattle could clearly feel the hostility of the little thing outside the fence. It raised its huge head warily, and its round eyes became irritable. Meh. Odin's hunting instincts made her imitate the horned cattle and let out 2 provocative roars. The leader of the cattle was instantly enraged and charged towards the fence. Then, Odin looked around excitedly and found that the guards and keepers were not nearby. She flipped over the fence very gently and ran towards the Bysmy horned cattle at an extremely fast speed. Odin's movements did not show any signs of attack or defense. She looked like a little girl who was pouncing toward her parents. The leader of the cattle was furious. Anyone who had lost their freedom and was locked up in a cage would definitely be furious. It would vent its anger on any creature that was hostile to it. And this time, its target was the little girl in front of it. The angry horned cattle that was covered in muscles and black mane stomped on the ground with its 4 hooves. It lowered its head and charged towards little Odin with its horns raised. The muscles on its body flowed freely as it ran, and the long hair on its neck fluttered in the air, forming a majestic and beautiful line. Odin did not seem to be aware of the danger, and excitedly ran towards the horned cattle. It looked like she wanted to give a hug. Then, when the horned cattle's horns were a meter away from her, she suddenly floated up and twisted her body to jump onto the horned cattle's back. She let out a cry and bit the horned cattle's neck. However, the mouth of the little girl in human form was too small. This bite did not seem to have any effect. The horned cattle did not even bleed, so Odin used both hands. An unimaginable burst of strength. With just a twist, the leader of the horned cattle, which was as majestic as an exotic beast, had its bones and nerves broken. Its thick neck was twisted 90 degrees as if it was weightless. It twitched and fell to the ground with a bang, stirring up some dust and grass. Odin jumped down and grabbed the huge horned cattle. She carried it and skipped out of the fence. She spent a few minutes looking for a secluded place and threw the horned cattle down. Then she started on the spot. She casually peeled off the horned cattle's fur and started eating without hesitation. I told you there would be no problem, Queen. In the royal palace, the leader of the gnolls, Hog, bowed to Luna and said, "It's okay." Luna patted her chest. When she saw Odin charging at the horned cattle without any sense of danger, she was a little scared. However, it turned out that a beast of this level could not hurt little Odin. However, after a pause, Luna still frowned. But how can she eat a living thing like this? Well, the princess is His Majesty's child after all. Some of the dragon's habits will appear when she is young. However, when she is a little older, there should be no problem. Hogg explained. The scene in the picture was bloody. Luna did not want to look at it anymore. She turned her head and snorted. The stupid genes of a big stupid dragon. Okay, you guys go and tell her to finish eating and come back quickly. She still has class later. Hogg nodded in agreement. At this moment, Odin, who was eating with his head down, suddenly had an idea. He raised his head vigilantly and looked around. He frowned and thought for a while, then wiped his mouth. Is Father fighting? Is there something that can fight against Father? Let's go take a look. With a whoosh, she transformed into her fairy dragon form. She did not care about the horned cattle on the ground. She flapped her wings and quickly flew away. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.